Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. Hey everyone, if you enjoy my content, don't forget to check out my second channel. The link is in the description or the comments. Your support means the world to me. This happened in the 80s, in the summer of 1986. The swamps of Louisiana, they always had an air of danger about them. I'd fished those waters my whole life, knew them like the back of my hand. My name is Elias. Some folks call me Swamp Fox because I always seem to make it out, no matter how thick the tangled undergrowth gets or how high the water rises. But that summer, even I got more than I bargained for. I had my catfishing lines out near a little traveled bayou. It was a place I'd stumbled on a few years back, deep in the marsh, and the catfish there seemed to grow as big as gators. My pirogue was tied to a cypress knee, and I was dozing with a beer in hand. The sun was dipping low, painting the whole swamp in hues of blood orange and sickly green. That's when I saw it, a ripple in the water, moving against the current. I sat up, alert. Nothing out here that size should move like that. It surfaced again, perhaps 20 feet away from me. In the half-light it looked massive and slick with algae, with a long, flat head and two eyes that glinted like gold coins. Not an alligator, not a snake. I scrambled up, my heart drumming, and grabbed my shotgun. It was propped against the side of the pirogue. Before I could get a good aim, the thing surged out of the water. It rose high, 7-8 feet tall, and I realized what it was in a burst of horrified recognition. A catfish. But not like any catfish I'd ever seen or even dreamt of in my worst nightmares. Its whiskers were as thick as tree roots, its mouth a gaping maw that could swallow me whole. The sheer size and wrongness of it struck me speechless even as it slammed down into the water right beside the boat. The pirogue rocked violently. My shotgun went clattering into the swamp, disappearing with a disheartening splash. I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance as water sloshed over the sides. Terror lent me speed. I fumbled for the outboard, yanking the starter cord, cursing as the engine wheezed and coughed but failed to catch. The catfish resurfaced beside me, its mouth snapping at the edge of the boat. I grabbed the paddle, struck out blindly, aiming for its gleaming eye. It gave a hiss like air escaping a broken pipe and pulled back, the blow glancing off its monstrous head. I dug the paddle in and pushed back, trying to put distance between us, but the pirogue felt sluggish, weighed down in the stern. My stomach lurched as I realized the thing had its jaws clamped around the outboard motor. The wood of the pirogue groaned and splintered. Another surge, and I lost my balance entirely, tumbling into the murky, chest-deep water. Panic threatened to drown me, but something cold and primal deep in my gut took over. I thrashed to the surface, gasping, my eyes frantic. There it was, a shadowed bulk circling me, its fins cutting the water like knives. I splashed towards the cypress tree where my boat had been tied, every nerve screaming. My fingers scrabbled on the thick, wet roots, and I hauled myself upwards. The catfish followed, its eyes fixed on me as it rose from the water once more, snapping its jaws in fury as I dangled just out of reach. I scrambled higher up the tree, the rough bark scraping my palms. Below, the relentless creature thrashed and battered the trunk. Heart pounding in my ears, I realized I was trapped. There was nowhere to go but down, right into those waiting jaws. A glint of metal in the water caught my eye, my fishing tackle box wedged in the cypress roots. Inside, I had a heavy hunting knife, a lucky charm from my great-granddaddy. I stretched out, reaching for the box with trembling hands, not daring to take my eyes off the monster below. I managed to dislodge the tackle box, fumbled with the latch, and pulled out the knife, its hefty weight grounding me in the moment. The catfish lunged forward, a mountain of scales and muscle. I screamed, more a war cry than a sound of terror, and jumped. It all happened in a rush. The impact as I hit the water again, the pain as teeth glanced off my arm, the burning in my lungs, and then I was slicing wildly with the knife. I felt the blade hit something solid, then slide and slice again. I surfaced, choking, my vision blurring. The catfish was thrashing wildly. Dark shapes churned the water. I couldn't tell if it was blood or just the mud stirred up in its frenzy. With a sob, I hauled myself back onto the cypress roots, clutching the bloodied knife and gasping for breath. The thrashing slowly subsided. I didn't dare look. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting the world in an eerie crimson glow. Swamp mosquitoes whined in my ears. I stayed frozen on that route, shivering, waiting for the creature to reappear, but the swamp remained eerily quiet. As darkness fell, I found a length of rope in the wreckage of the pirogue and used it to haul myself higher up the tree. I spent the night there, clinging to the branches with one arm, while the other ached with what I feared was a nasty bite. Sleep, of course, was out of the question. In the gray light of dawn, I lowered myself back down, every muscle screaming. The catfish was gone. There was no trace of it save for a few glistening scales shimmering dully in the swamp mud. I staggered to the remains of my boat, retrieved a tarp, and fashioned a makeshift bandage for my wound. My teeth chattered as I pushed off back towards civilization, not sure if I was delirious from fever or the shock of it all. The tow truck driver gave me a long, disbelieving stare when I finally hailed him down on a gravel road hours later. I must have been a sight, covered in mud, blood, and swamp water, clutching my granddaddy's knife. But he didn't say a word, just took me straight to the hospital. Word got around after that. Folks thought I was spinning tales or had gotten into a mess with bootleggers. I didn't bother to correct them. Some things you just have to see to believe, and even then your mind tries to tell you it's all a bad dream. They patched me up at the hospital, some torn muscles and a hell of a lot of stitches. I even managed to convince the doctor a gator had gotten me, easier to explain than the truth. I stayed with my cousin in town for a while, jumpy, haunted by the gleam of those catfish eyes in my sleep. Couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done with the swamp creature, that it was somehow still connected to me. News traveled back to my reservation. The elders came to see me, listening intently to my story. My grandfather, a man known for his wisdom and few words, simply nodded gravely and said, "The Ogwa." I'd never heard the name, but something in his tone, the deep respect laced with a hint of fear, told me this was more than just a monster tale. Later, when we were alone, my grandfather explained. The Ogwa, he said, was an ancient spirit, a guardian of the watery places. It took many forms, but some said the catfish was its favorite guise. In times long ago, when the tribe lived in those same bayous, the Ogwa had protected them. But as the world changed, as men forgot the old ways, the balance had been broken. I struggled with that. Was this some kind of punishment or a warning? The thought of that creature, driven by hunger or rage or something even more unknowable, sent shivers down my spine. Despite the gnawing terror, a strange determination began to grow in me. If the Ogwa was out of balance, maybe I could help bring that balance back. Some old debt of kinship, maybe, from my ancestors to its kind. Weeks turned into months. I healed, grew stronger, spent my days fishing, not for sport, but for sustenance. I left offerings in the swamp, fish, cornmeal, even tobacco, as my grandfather instructed. I spoke to the water, to the trees, apologizing for the arrogance of men and promising respect for the old ways. There was no sign of the massive catfish, but as the rituals became habit, a feeling of peace began to replace the constant dread. I still fished sometimes, but I stuck a lot closer to the beaten path these days. Never did go back to that bayou. That catfish, it could still be out there, lurking beneath the muddy water, growing bigger every year, waiting. The thought kept me up at night, made me jump at shadows on the water. But as summer turned to fall and fall to winter, life settled into a new rhythm. I found work at a local bait shop, spinning tales for the tourists and teaching them to respect the swamp. Some nights I'd sit on my porch, watching the mist rise off the water, and I'd feel something. A presence, not menacing exactly, but watchful, waiting. It was on one of those nights, as spring was just starting to creep back into the air, that I felt the call. It wasn't a sound, not really, more like a tugging at the base of my skull, a whisper in my bones. I knew, without knowing how I knew, that it was time to go back. I packed light, my knife, some rations, a flashlight. As an afterthought, I grabbed a small pouch of tobacco, an offering. The moon was full as I pushed my new pirogue into the water, the silver light turning the swamp into a world of shadows and secrets. The journey felt both endless and immediate. One moment I was navigating familiar channels, the next I was deep in the heart of the bayou, surrounded by ancient cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay and new growth, and there it was, the place where it all began. The water was mirror still, reflecting the starry sky above. I cut the engine, letting the pirogue drift. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anticipation. "I'm here," I said, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the swamp. "I've come to make things right." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly a ripple formed in the center of the bayou. It grew, spreading outward in concentric circles. And from the depths rose the ogwa. It was both familiar and utterly alien. The massive catfish form I remembered, but now I could see the spirit behind it. Its eyes glowed with an inner light, and patterns swirled across its scales like living tattoos. It regarded me silently, and I felt the weight of centuries in its gaze. I stood, somehow keeping my balance in the small boat. "I understand now," I said, though I wasn't sure I did, not really. "We've forgotten the old ways. We've taken without giving back. I'm here to change that." The ogwa's mouth opened, and I braced myself for, I don't know what, a roar, an attack? Instead, a sound like rushing water filled my mind, and with it came images. The swamp as it had been, teeming with life. The swamp as it was now, polluted and shrinking. And a vision of what could be, a restored balance where man and nature existed in harmony. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'll do whatever it takes," I promised. The ogwa surged forward, and this time I didn't flinch. It circled my boat, creating a whirlpool that should have capsized us both. But instead, I felt myself lifted, suspended between water and air. The ogwa's eyes met mine, and in that moment I understood. I was to be the bridge, the connection between the old world and the new. A guardian like the ogwa, but one who could walk among men. The knowledge settled into me like a physical weight, both burden and gift. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold, the ogwa sank back beneath the waters. But I knew it wasn't gone. It would never be gone. And neither would I. I returned to the reservation a changed man. The elders saw it in my eyes, in the way I carried myself. My grandfather nodded, a small smile on his weathered face. "You have been chosen," he said simply. And so began my new life. By day I worked to protect the swamp, lobbying for conservation efforts, teaching a new generation to respect the delicate balance of nature. By night I patrolled the waterways, a silent guardian against those who would harm the land. Sometimes in the deepest parts of the swamp, I would catch a glimpse of something massive moving beneath the surface, a reminder of the power that flowed through these waters and through me. The swamp had always been a place of mystery and danger. Now it was something more. A sacred trust, a living entity that breathed and dreamed alongside us. And I, Elias, once called Swamp Fox, had become its voice. As I sit here now, years later, I can feel the change in the air. The swamp is healing, slowly but surely. And when the mist rises off the water at twilight, I swear I can see shapes moving within it, the spirits of the land awakening once more. The story of the ogwa is not over. In many ways, it's just beginning. And as long as there are those who remember the old ways, who respect the delicate balance of nature, it will continue. For in the heart of the swamp, in the shadows and the silence, the ancient spirits still watch and wait. And sometimes, if you're very lucky or perhaps very cursed, they reach out and change your life forever. The years that followed my encounter with the ogwa were a time of profound change, not just for me, but for the entire bayou. As I embraced my role as guardian, I began to see the swamp through new eyes. Every ripple in the water, every rustle in the underbrush held meaning. The land was alive in ways I'd never fully appreciated before. My days fell into a rhythm, but one that was far from monotonous. I'd wake before dawn, slipping out onto the water in my pirogue. These early morning patrols were a time of quiet reflection, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish or the call of a heron. But they were also a time of vigilance. I'd scan the shorelines for signs of illegal dumping or poaching, my senses attuned to any disturbance in the natural order. One misty morning I came across a group of men unloading barrels from a battered pickup truck. The acrid smell of chemicals stung my nostrils even from a distance. I felt a surge of anger, not just my own, but a deeper, more primal rage that I knew came from the agua itself. I didn't confront them directly. That wasn't my way anymore. Instead, I melted back into the fog, noting their location. Later that day, I made some calls to the local environmental agency and to a journalist I'd befriended. Within a week, the illegal dumping operation was shut down, and the men responsible were facing hefty fines and jail time. It wasn't always so straightforward, though. The threats to the swamp were often more insidious, harder to fight. Agricultural runoff, climate change, the slow encroachment of development. These were enemies that couldn't be defeated with a single decisive action. They required constant vigilance, education, and a willingness to play the long game. I threw myself into community outreach, speaking at schools and town halls about the importance of preserving the wetlands. Some folks were receptive, eager to learn about the complex ecosystem in their backyards. Others were skeptical, seeing the swamp as nothing more than a breeding ground for mosquitoes and a barrier to progress. But I persevered, drawing on the quiet strength I'd gained from my connection with the agua. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. More people started to take an interest in conservation efforts. Local politicians, sensing the shift in public opinion, began to support stricter environmental regulations. Through it all, I never forgot the awesome and terrifying power of the agua. On nights when the moon was full and the air thick with humidity, I'd sometimes catch glimpses of it moving through the deeper channels, a flash of scales here, a ripple of water there. It was a reminder of the delicate balance we were striving to maintain. It was in the summer of 1991, 5 years after my first encounter with the agua, that everything changed again. The signs had been there for weeks if you knew how to read them. The egrets had been restless, taking flight at the slightest provocation. The water levels in the bayou had dropped, exposing mudflats that normally remained submerged. My grandfather, his eyes clouded with cataracts but still sharp as ever, had shaken his head gravely. "A big storm's coming," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the kind that reshapes the land." I'd nodded, feeling the truth of his words in my bones. The air had a charged quality to it, like the moment before lightning strikes. In the depths of the swamp, I could sense the agua stirring, preparing for what was to come. As the days passed, the tension built. Weather reports started to talk about a tropical depression forming in the Gulf, one that had the potential to develop into something more serious. Most folks took it in stride. Hurricanes were a fact of life down here after all. But I knew this was different. This wasn't just a natural disaster brewing, it was a reckoning. The night before the storm was set to make landfall, I ventured deep into the heart of the swamp. The water was unnaturally still, the usual chorus of frogs and insects eerily silent. I guided my pirogue to a small island dominated by an ancient cypress tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted with age. As I stepped onto the shore, I felt a familiar presence. The agua rose from the depths, its massive form blocking out the stars. But this time, I didn't feel fear. Instead, there was a sense of shared purpose, of a task that needed to be done. The agua's eyes met mine, and suddenly my mind was filled with visions. I saw the storm as it truly was, not just wind and rain, but a force of nature imbued with spiritual power. It would bring destruction, yes, but also cleansing, a chance to wipe the slate clean and start anew. But there was danger too. If the storm's fury wasn't directed, if the cleansing went too far, the damage could be catastrophic, not just to human settlements, but to the delicate ecosystem of the swamp itself. That's where I came in. I understood then what was being asked of me. I would need to stand at the intersection of two worlds, the physical and the spiritual, and help guide the storm's power. It was a monumental task, one that filled me with both awe and terror. As the agua sank back beneath the water, I felt a change come over me. My senses sharpened, my connection to the swamp deepening until I could feel every ripple, every current. The boundary between my body and the surrounding wilderness began to blur. I made my way back to my cabin, moving as if in a dream. The wind was picking up now, the first outer bands of the storm reaching us. I gathered what supplies I could, some food, water, a first aid kit, knowing that I would need to ride out the hurricane in the heart of the swamp. As I worked, memories of that night 5 years ago flooded back. The terror I'd felt then, the certainty that I was about to die. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had been changed, molded by my experiences and my connection to the Ogwa. I was no longer prey, but a guardian in my own right. The first raindrops began to fall as I pushed my pirogue back into the water. Lightning flashed on the horizon, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Most people were battening down the hatches, evacuating to higher ground. But I was heading into the teeth of the storm, guided by a force I still didn't fully understand. As I navigated the increasingly choppy waters, I thought about the dual nature of what was coming. Destruction and renewal, chaos and cleansing. The storm was neither good nor evil, just as the Ogwa wasn't. They were forces of nature, beyond human morality. My job wasn't to judge, but to guide. To stand in the gap between the human world and the world of spirits, and try to find a balance. The wind howled around me, driving sheets of rain that stung my face. But beneath the surface turmoil, I could feel something else. A deep, thrumming energy that seemed to be building with each passing moment. The Ogwa was on the move, gathering its strength for what was to come. I steered my pirogue towards a stand of cypress trees, their massive trunks offering some shelter from the wind. As I secured the boat, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. For a brief moment I thought I saw shapes moving in the water. Not just the Ogwa, but other creatures. Spirits of the swamp that had been dormant for generations, awakening in response to the storm's power. I closed my eyes, reaching out with senses that went beyond the physical. The boundary between the material world and the spirit world was thinning, reality becoming fluid in the face of the storm's might. And there, in the eye of the hurricane, both literal and metaphorical, I found my place. I stood on the edge of my pirogue, one hand gripping a cypress knee for balance, the other outstretched towards the roiling sky. Rain lashed at me, wind threatened to tear me from my perch, but I held firm. I was the conduit now, the bridge between worlds. Through me, the Ogwa and the other spirits of the swamp would work to channel the storm's fury, to direct its cleansing power where it was needed most. As the heart of the hurricane approached, I felt myself slipping into a trance-like state. My consciousness expanded, encompassing not just the immediate area around me but the entire swamp. I could feel the trees bending in the wind, the animals huddling in their burrows, the water surging and receding. And there, moving through it all like a leviathan from some primordial sea, was the Ogwa. Its presence was both terrifying and comforting, a reminder of the raw power of nature and the ancient pact between humans and the spirits of the land. Together, we began our work. Where the storm threatened to overwhelm levees and flood communities, we directed its force elsewhere. We guided the surge to scour out channels clogged with pollution, to sweep away the detritus of human carelessness. Lightning struck dead trees, clearing the way for new growth. It was exhausting, exhilarating work. I lost all sense of time, existing only in the eternal present of the storm's fury. My body ached, my mind reeled from the strain of channeling such immense forces. But I couldn't stop. Too much was at stake. As the eye of the hurricane passed over us, there was a moment of eerie calm. The rain stopped, the wind died down, and for a brief time stars were visible in a clear patch of sky. In that moment of respite, I saw the Ogwa clearly. It rose from the water before me, its form shimmering with an inner light. Our eyes met, and I felt a surge of something that might have been approval. Then the moment passed, and the back wall of the eye wall slammed into us with renewed fury. The work began again, more frantic now as the storm began to move inland. We raced to finish our task, to ensure that the cleansing was complete but not catastrophic. As dawn broke, the hurricane finally began to weaken. The rain softened to a steady drizzle, the wind dropping to a more manageable roar. I slumped in my pirogue, every muscle screaming, my mind foggy with exhaustion. But as I looked around, I could see that we had succeeded. The swamp had been battered, yes, but not broken. And in the destruction, I could already see the seeds of renewal. Slowly, painfully, I began to make my way back to civilization. I knew that the work was far from over. There would be cleanup to oversee, rebuilding to be done. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. We had faced the storm and emerged stronger for it. As I neared the edge of the swamp, I caught one last glimpse of the agua. It was just a flash, a suggestion of movement beneath the surface, but it was enough. A reminder that no matter what challenges we faced, we would face them together. The guardian and the guarded, the human and the spirit, intertwined in a bond as old as the land itself. The days and weeks following the hurricane were a blur of activity. As I had predicted, there was much work to be done. Homes had been damaged, roads washed out, and debris was scattered across the landscape. But amidst the chaos, there was also a sense of purpose, of community coming together in the face of adversity. I threw myself into the recovery efforts, using my knowledge of the swamp to help guide cleanup crews to the areas most in need of attention. It was delicate work, balancing the needs of the human population with the necessity of allowing the natural processes of the swamp to take their course. There were moments of conflict, of course. Some wanted to use the destruction as an opportunity to push for more development, arguing that we needed better infrastructure to withstand future storms. Others advocated for abandoning the most vulnerable areas entirely, letting the swamp reclaim what it had taken. I found myself in the middle, advocating for a measured approach that respected both human needs and the integrity of the ecosystem. It wasn't always an easy position to maintain, but I drew strength from my connection to the agua and the other spirits of the swamp. As the weeks turned to months, signs of renewal began to appear. In areas where the storm had cleared away choking undergrowth, new plants began to sprout. Wildlife returned to areas that had been too polluted or degraded before, drawn by the cleaner water and revitalized habitat. One crisp autumn morning, I took a group of school children out on a field trip to see the recovering swamp. As we glided through the water in a flat-bottomed boat, I pointed out the signs of new life. A cluster of cypress seedlings, a pair of wood ducks nesting in a hollow tree, the tracks of a river otter in the mud. The children were full of questions, their eyes wide with wonder at the world around them. As I answered their queries, I felt a surge of hope. These kids, if given the chance, could grow up with a deep appreciation for the swamp and all it represented. They could be the next generation of guardians. As we rounded a bend in the bayou, a hush fell over the group. There, not 20 feet from our boat, was an enormous alligator sunning itself on a log. The children gasped in a mixture of fear and awe. I smiled, recognizing the ancient reptile as one I'd seen many times before. "That's old Scarback," I told them quietly. "He's been around longer than I have. Respect him, and he'll respect you." As if on cue, the alligator slowly slid into the water, disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The children erupted in excited whispers, and I knew that this moment would stay with them for years to come. It was experiences like these that reinforced my commitment to my role as guardian. Every person who came to understand and appreciate the swamp was another ally in the fight to protect it. And with each passing day, I could feel the bond between the human world and the spirit world growing stronger. The agua's presence was a constant, though often subtle. Sometimes it was just a feeling, a sense of being watched over. Other times it was more tangible, a massive shape glimpsed beneath the water, a sudden calm descending over a troubled area of the swamp. As winter approached, bringing with it cooler temperatures and clearer skies, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in the years since my first encounter with the agua. I had gone from a simple fisherman to something more, a bridge between worlds, a guardian of ancient traditions in a rapidly changing world. The challenges we faced were far from over. Climate change, pollution, the ever-present threat of overdevelopment. These were battles that would be fought for generations to come. But I no longer felt alone in the fight. I had the strength of the agua behind me, the wisdom of my ancestors to guide me, and a growing community of people who understood the value of what we were protecting. One evening, as the sun set over the bayou, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I stood on the porch of my cabin and looked out over the water. A mist was rising, twisting into shapes that seemed almost human for a moment before dissolving back into formlessness. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The swamp was alive, breathing, constantly changing, yet eternally the same. and I was a part of it all, no longer just an observer but a participant in the grand, mysterious dance of life that played out in these waters. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, I whispered a quiet thanks to the Ogwa and all the spirits of the swamp. They had chosen me, changed me, given me a purpose beyond anything I could have imagined. And in return, I had dedicated my life to protecting their domain, to preserving the delicate balance between the worlds. The story of the Ogwa, of the swamp and its guardians, was an ongoing one. It had no neat ending, no final resolution. It was a tale of constant vigilance, of small victories and setbacks, of slow change and sudden upheavals. But it was also a story of hope, of the enduring power of nature and the human spirit working in harmony. As I turned to go back inside, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the water, a massive shape gliding just beneath the surface, its scales glinting in the starlight, the Ogwa. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I felt a surge of understanding pass between us. This was my path now, my calling, to stand as a guardian of the swamp, a keeper of old ways in a new world. And as long as there were those who remembered, who cared, who fought to preserve the magic and mystery of these ancient waters, the Ogwa and its kind would never truly be forgotten. The swamp had its protector, and I, Elias, once known as Swamp Fox, now had my purpose. In the end, perhaps that was all anyone could ask for, a place to belong, a cause to fight for, and a legacy to pass on to those who would come after. As I closed the door behind me, the night air filled with the song of frogs and cicadas, I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new wonders, and I would face them as I always had, with respect for the old ways, hope for the future, and the quiet strength of the Ogwa flowing through me. Years passed, and I grew older. My hair turned gray and my steps became a little slower, but my connection to the swamp and the Ogwa remained as strong as ever. I had become something of a local legend, the old man of the bayou, keeper of ancient secrets and protector of the wild places. As I approached my 70th year, I began to worry about what would happen when I was gone. Who would take up the mantle of guardian? Who would stand between the world of men and the world of spirits? It was on a misty morning in early spring that I got my answer. I was out in my pirogue, checking on a stand of young cypress trees I'd helped plant years ago. A sound caught my attention, another boat moving through the fog. As it drew closer, I recognized the figure steering it. A young woman named Marie, granddaughter of one of my oldest friends on the reservation. Marie had always been curious about the swamp, pestering me with questions since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. As she grew older, that curiosity had blossomed into a deep love and respect for the bayou. She'd gone off to college, studying environmental science, but had always come back during breaks to help with conservation efforts. "Uncle Elias," she called out as her boat drew alongside mine. She wasn't really my niece, but that's how things work down here, everyone's family. "I hoped I'd find you out here." I smiled at her, noting the determined set of her jaw. "What brings you out so early, child?" She took a deep breath. "I've been having dreams, strange dreams, about the swamp, about creatures I've never seen before, and about you." A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. I knew in that moment what was happening. The Ogwa was choosing its next guardian. Over the next few hours, as the sun rose and burned away the mist, I told Marie everything. About my encounter with the Ogwa all those years ago, about the storm and the cleansing, about the delicate balance we worked to maintain. She listened with wide eyes, occasionally nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of awe and determination. "What do I need to do?" I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "You're already doing it, child. You've been preparing for this your whole life, whether you knew it or not." Over the next few years, I took Marie under my wing, teaching her everything I knew about the swamp and its spirits. She was a quick study, her scientific knowledge complementing the more mystical aspects of our work in ways I never could have managed. It was on my 75th birthday that I felt the call. Not from the Ogwa this time, but from something deeper, older. I knew my time was coming to an end. I took my pirogue out one last time, Marie by my side. We traveled to the heart of the swamp, to the place where I had first encountered the ogwa. As we approached, the water began to churn. The ogwa rose before us, majestic and terrifying as ever. But this time I felt no fear, only a deep sense of peace and completion. I turned to Marie. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her face solemn but unafraid. I stepped forward, placing one foot in the water. The ogwa's eyes met mine, and I felt a rush of memories. All the years of guardianship, the triumphs and the setbacks, the quiet moments of communion with nature, and the heart-pounding encounters with forces beyond human understanding. "Thank you," I whispered, to the ogwa, to the swamp, to all the spirits that had guided me over the years. Then I turned back to Marie. "The swamp is in your hands now. Protect it, love it, and always remember, you're never alone out here." With those words, I stepped fully into the water. I felt the ogwa's presence surround me, not threatening now, but welcoming. As I sank beneath the surface, I caught one last glimpse of Marie, tears streaming down her face, but a look of fierce determination in her eyes. I knew then that the swamp was in good hands. The circle was complete. One guardian passed on, another took their place. The ancient dance continued. As my consciousness began to fade, merging with the water, the mud, the very essence of the swamp, I felt a profound sense of homecoming. I had lived as a bridge between two worlds. Now, at the end, I was becoming a part of both. My last thought, before I became one with the swamp, was a hope for the future. For Marie, for the ogwa, for all the creatures great and small that called this place home. May they endure, may they thrive, may they continue to weave the magic of the bayou for generations to come. And so the story of Elias, once known as Swamp Fox, came to an end. But the greater story, the story of the swamp, of the ogwa, of the eternal dance between man and nature, that story continued. It lives on in the whisper of wind through the cypress trees, in the splash of a fish beneath lily pads, in the quiet determination of those who still remember the old ways. For in the heart of the swamp, where the veil between worlds is thin, magic still exists. And as long as there are those willing to listen, to believe, to stand as guardians of the wild places, it always will. This happened in the 80s, in the summer of 1985. The dusty heat of Northern California settled over the Klamath River like a heavy blanket, the air thick and oppressive as I stood on the dirt bike trail overlooking the winding waters below. My name is Hatapa, and at 17 I thought I knew everything about these lands, the reservation where I'd grown up, the forests I'd explored since I could walk. But that summer would prove just how little I truly understood about the world around me and the ancient, terrifying secrets it held. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. My friends Kern and Olathe were ahead on the narrow path, their dirt bikes kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air. It was a scene I'd witnessed 100 times before, the three of us tearing through the brush, laughing and racing as we pushed our bikes to their limits. But today, something felt off. I killed the engine of my bike, the sudden silence pressing in around me. A prickle of unease crawled up the back of my neck as I squinted down the trail. The clearing ahead was unnaturally still, devoid of the usual rustling leaves and birdsong that filled these woods. "Yo, Hatapa, what's the holdup?" Kern's voice carried back to me, tinged with impatience as he revved his engine. Something ain't right," I murmured, more to myself than in response. The very air seemed to have changed, growing thick and heavy in my lungs. I kick-started my bike back to life, nerves jangling as I caught up to my friends. One look at their faces told me they felt it too, that creeping sense of wrongness that had settled over the forest. Without a word, we dismounted, leaving our bikes idling by the side of the trail. Whatever was about to happen, we'd face it on foot. We edged forward, the silence growing more oppressive with each step, and then we saw it. The thing that had brought the world to a standstill. To this day, I struggle to describe what stood before us. The creature was immense, easily 7 feet tall at the shoulder, its form silhouetted against the gleaming river. Thick, leathery hide covered its body, mottled in shades of green and brown that seemed to shift in the fading light. It stood upright like a man, but there was nothing human about its elongated head, sunken eyes, or the wicked claws that tipped its massive forearms. It crouched at the water's edge, hunched over. Something. My stomach lurched as I realized it was feeding, tearing into what might have once been a deer. Now it was little more than a mangled carcass, barely recognizable as it dangled from the beast's jaws. Fear crashed through me, a primal terror that stripped away all pretense of bravery. I'd grown up hunting, tracking bears and mountain lions through these same woods. But this was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. My hand instinctively went to the hunting knife at my hip, though I knew it would be useless against such a monstrosity. Beside me, Olathe's face had gone ashen, his voice barely above a whisper as he breathed, "What in the world?" "I don't know, man," I managed to croak out, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears. "But I don't like it." As if sensing our presence, the creature suddenly lifted its head, those dark sunken eyes fixed on us with an unsettling intelligence. It tilted its head, almost curious, before a blood-curdling snarl rumbled from deep in its throat. The sound vibrated through the ground beneath our feet, and in that moment I knew we were in mortal danger. "Run!" Kern shouted, his cry shattering the paralysis that had gripped us. We turned and sprinted back up the path, our ragged breaths and pounding footsteps seeming impossibly loud in the unnatural quiet of the forest. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and my heart nearly stopped. The beast was gaining on us with terrifying speed, each powerful stride eating up the distance between us. Desperation took over and I veered off the trail, crashing through the underbrush. Some distant part of my mind reasoned that splitting up might give us a better chance. One target was easier than three, right? But as I ran, the trees grew denser, and with sickening clarity I realized I was heading towards a dead end. The path ahead led to a steep cliff, easily 100-foot drop to the rapids below. I skidded to a stop at the cliff's edge, terror clawing at my throat as I spun around. That's when I heard it, a choked cry that could only belong to Olathe. My blood ran cold as I saw the creature's claws sink into my friend's back, dragging him to the ground. His screams echoed through the forest, a sound of pure agony that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as the beast tore into Olathe. Blood sprayed in an arc as his cries faded to wet, gurgling gasps. Kern was nowhere in sight. He must have kept running, or... I couldn't bear to consider the alternative. There was no time for grief. The creature's eyes locked onto me, red and unblinking. It licked Olathe's blood from its claws with a long, forked tongue, baring teeth like daggers. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest as I backed away slowly, desperately searching for any means of escape. That's when my heel hit empty air. The world tilted sickeningly and I pitched backward, fingers scrabbling frantically for purchase on the smooth, loose rocks of the cliff face. For a moment I hung suspended between earth and sky, and then I was falling, tumbling down the steep incline. Branches tore at my clothes and skin as I plummeted, each impact driving the breath from my lungs. I slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. Pain exploded through every inch of my body, and for a moment the world went dark around the edges. I gasped for air, each breath feeling like fire in my chest. Groaning, I forced myself to look up, fighting waves of nausea and dizziness. The creature stood at the cliff's edge, peering down with those hungry, alien eyes. My heart sank as I realized it was beginning to descend. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die. And then, a gunshot shattered the air. The beast roared in pain, rearing back. A second shot thundered out, followed quickly by a third. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the muzzle flashes. Someone was up on the cliff, firing at the thing. The creature stumbled, snarling in confusion and rage. Then, with a final frustrated growl, it lumbered off into the trees. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. A laugh, bordering on hysterical, bubbled up from my throat. I was alive. Against all odds, I had survived. "Hatapa!" a familiar voice called from above. "Hatapa, are you down there?" My heart leapt as I recognized the gruff tones of Kyoki, the reservation's game warden. A man of few words, but someone you definitely wanted on your side in a crisis. Yeah, I managed to yell back, my voice hoarse. Kiyoki, man, I owe you my life. Don't thank me yet, he shouted down. Looks like you busted yourself up pretty good. Hang on. Within minutes, Kiyoki had scrambled down to my side, his weathered face creased with concern. You okay, son? He asked, dark eyes scanning my battered form. I will be, I grunted, struggling to my feet. A white-hot lance of pain shot through my leg, nearly buckling my knee. Looks like a nasty break, Kiyoki observed grimly. He helped me up the steep incline, both of us grunting with the effort. What the hell was that thing? Beats me, I said through clenched teeth, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. As we reached the top, I saw Kern standing there. He was shaking like a leaf, eyes wide with terror. Kiyoki followed my gaze, his expression darkening. Son, where's Olathe? He asked quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow, washing away the last of the adrenaline coursing through my system. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. He didn't make it, I whispered. Kiyoki drew a sharp breath. Then to my shock, he threw his head back and shouted into the forest. His voice was filled with rage, the words in a language I didn't understand, something guttural and ancient that sent chills racing down my spine. We made it back to the reservation just as dusk painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Kiyoki drove his battered pickup, with Kern and me huddled in the back, both still shaken to our cores. The events of the past hour kept replaying in my mind like some kind of warped, horrifying loop. Olathe's screams, the creature's blood-stained teeth, the fall that should have killed me. Every muscle in my body ached, and my leg throbbed with a pain that bordered on unbearable. What do we tell people? Kern whispered, his eyes bloodshot and wide with fear. About Olathe? We tell the truth, Kiyoki said grimly from the driver's seat. But not all of it. He pulled up in front of my house, where my mom was already rushing out to meet us. Her face twisted with alarm when she saw me, bruised and limping, supported by Kern and Kiyoki. What happened? She cried, her voice cracking with anxiety. An accident, I managed, wincing as Kiyoki lowered me onto the old porch swing. We were riding. Olathe, he fell. He didn't make it. Her hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping as tears welled in her eyes. She looked from me to Kern, then to Kiyoki, silently pleading for more information. Kiyoki offered a single solemn nod. Animal attack, he said quietly. There's no point trying to track it down. It's long gone. It was a lie, of course, but it was the story we would stick to. First with my mom, then with the others who were bound to hear about Olathe. We didn't breathe a word about the creature or the gunshots that had saved my life. Kiyoki and I exchanged a long look when no one else was around, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Some things were better left unspoken. The truth would only bring more danger. In the days that followed Olathe's death, a pall of dread settled over the reservation like a heavy fog. People whispered about an unknown predator roaming free, their voices hushed and eyes darting nervously to the tree line. No one ventured into the forest alone anymore, not even the most seasoned hunters and trappers. The woods that had once been a source of life and sustenance for our people now felt like a place of lurking shadows and unseen threats. I couldn't shake the image of the creature from my mind, its blood-soaked claws, those unblinking eyes that had regarded us with such alien intelligence. The memories haunted my every waking moment. Sleep offered no respite. Nightmares plagued me, leaving me jolting awake in a cold sweat, heart pounding against my ribs. Despite the constant ache in my broken leg, I found myself spending more and more time outdoors, especially at night. The darkness felt like a shroud, but I found some strange comfort in it. It made me feel closer to Olathe in a way I couldn't quite explain. I also began carrying a gun, an old hunting rifle that had belonged to my grandfather, carefully hidden from my worried mother's eyes. I wasn't hunting for the creature, not really, but if it came for me again, I'd be ready. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, painfully, the raw wound of Olathe's death began to scab over. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it lessened, fading into a kind of wary caution that settled over the reservation. Life found its own rhythm again, as it always does, but I hadn't forgotten, not for a single day. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 4 months after that fateful day by the river, when everything changed again. I was out hiking, deeper in the forest than I usually ventured these days. The sky was clear, with just a hint of winter's chill touching the air. I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a moss-covered boulder when something caught my eye. There, in a patch of soft mud near a gurgling stream, was a set of tracks. They were faint, already beginning to dry and crumble at the edges, but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as I crouched down for a closer look, heart hammering against my ribs. The prints were too large to belong to any deer or bear, and the shape. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized the distinctive claw marks. They were the same. I wasn't imagining this. The creature, the thing that had killed Olathe, was still out here. A potent mix of fear and determination surged through me as I began to follow the tracks. They led me deeper into the forest, through areas I'd never explored before. I walked for hours, barely noticing as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. Just when I was about to give up, thinking I'd lost the trail, the tracks ended abruptly at the base of a sheer rock face. Frowning, I looked up, squinting in the fading light. There, partially obscured by dense foliage, was a narrow opening in the cliff, the mouth of a cave. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But then I thought of Olathe, of the nightmares that still plagued me, and my jaw set with grim resolve. I had to do this, for Olathe, for myself, for everyone on the reservation who lived in fear of the shadows. Crouching low, I crawled through the cave entrance. The air inside was cool and damp, barely lit by the dim rays of sunlight filtering through the foliage. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I made out the contours of the cavern. At its center was a crude nest of branches, and I swallowed hard as I realized what I was looking at. Animal bones. Human bones. A wave of revulsion and rage washed over me. This was its lair, the place where it brought its victims, I couldn't finish the thought. That's when I noticed another opening at the back of the cave, a tunnel leading deeper into the mountain, and then a movement in the shadows, a flash of pale, scaly skin, the glint of long claws, and those eyes, those haunting alien eyes that had featured in so many of my nightmares. The Nahulo, the creature of legend, whispered about by elders around campfires. I'd always thought it was just a story, meant to scare children into behaving. But here it was, real and terrifying and right in front of me. It let out a low, menacing growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock around us. Without hesitation, I lifted the rifle and fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, leaving my ears ringing. The creature roared in pain and anger, a sound that shook dust from the cave ceiling. Then it vanished into the darkness of the tunnel, leaving me alone with the echoes of its fury. I didn't wait around. I scrambled out of the cave, sprinting back through the forest as fast as my still healing leg would allow. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the reservation, lungs burning and legs trembling with exhaustion. The next day, I told Kyoki everything. He listened in grim silence, his weathered face etched with concern and something deeper, a kind of ancient worry that made him look far older than his years. "You've done a brave thing, Hatapa," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But this ends here. The Nahulo is ancient, cunning. There's no telling what it's truly capable of." And then the awful truth dawned on me, settling in my gut like a stone. The creature would heal. It would come back. And when it did, the reservation wouldn't be safe. None of us would be. As the realization sank in, I felt the weight of responsibility settle onto my shoulders. This wasn't just about avenging Olathe anymore. It was about protecting our people, our home, from a threat most of them didn't even know existed. I looked at Kyoki, seeing the same determination reflected in his eyes. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kyoki was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of generations. "We prepare," he said simply, "and we hope that when the time comes, we're ready." In the months that followed, Kyoki and I threw ourselves into preparation. We spent long hours in the forest, tracking and studying every sign of the Nahulo's presence. Kyoki taught me ancient hunting techniques passed down through generations, skills that had been all but forgotten in modern times. We pored over old legends and stories, searching for any clue that might give us an edge against the creature. As winter settled over the Klamath River Valley, blanketing the reservation in snow, our work took on a new urgency. The harsh weather drove game deeper into the forest, and with it, the Nahulo. Sightings became more frequent, glimpses of a shadowy form moving through the trees, strange tracks in the snow, livestock found mutilated on the outskirts of town. Fear gripped the reservation once again. People whispered about evil spirits and ancient curses. Some talked about leaving, abandoning the land that had been our home for generations. But for most of us, this wasn't just a place to live. It was a part of who we were. We couldn't simply walk away. One bitterly cold night in January, I sat with Kyoki in his small cabin on the edge of the reservation. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls covered in faded maps and old photographs. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and the pungent herbs Kyoki used in his rituals. "There's something I need to show you," Kyoki said, his voice gravelly with age and worry. He reached beneath his bunk, pulling out a worn leather case. From it, he withdrew an object wrapped in deerskin. My breath caught as he unwrapped it, revealing an intricately carved bone knife. The handle was adorned with symbols I didn't recognize, the blade wickedly sharp despite its obvious age. "This has been passed down through my family for generations," Kyoki explained, his eyes never leaving the knife. "It's said to have the power to banish evil spirits, to send them back to the realm they came from." I reached out hesitantly, my fingers hovering over the knife. "You think it can kill the Nahulo?" Kyoki's expression was grim. "I don't know if anything can truly kill it, but this might be our best chance at stopping it." As I wrapped my hand around the knife's handle, a strange sensation coursed through me, a tingling warmth that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. In that moment, I felt a connection to something greater than myself, to the long line of warriors and protectors who had come before me. "When the time comes," Kyoki said solemnly, "you'll know how to use it." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and mounting tension. We trained relentlessly, honing our skills and our senses. I spent hours practicing with the bone knife, learning to move silently through the forest, to track even the faintest signs of our prey. And all the while, the Nahulo grew bolder. Attacks increased, moving closer and closer to the heart of the reservation. People began to disappear. Hunters who never returned from the forest, children who strayed too far from home. The fear was palpable now, hanging over the reservation like a storm cloud ready to break. It all came to a head on a moonless night in early March. I was on patrol with Kyoki, moving through the silent forest with all senses on high alert. The air was crisp with the first hints of spring, but there was an unnatural stillness that set my nerves on edge. We had just reached the clearing where I had first encountered the Nahulo when we heard it, a blood-curdling scream that shattered the night's silence. Without a word, we broke into a run, racing towards the sound. As we burst into another clearing, my blood ran cold. There, illuminated by the beam of Kyoki's flashlight, was the Nahulo. It towered over a fallen figure, one of the younger hunters from the reservation, his body broken and bloody. The creature's head snapped towards us, those terrible eyes reflecting the light like twin embers. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet, it charged. Everything I had learned in the past months kicked in. I dove to the side, rolling to my feet with the bone knife already in my hand. Kyoki fired his rifle, the shots echoing through the trees. The Nahulo staggered but didn't fall, its leathery hide seeming to absorb the bullets. I circled around, looking for an opening. The creature's attention was fixed on Kyoki, giving me the chance I needed. With a cry that came from somewhere deep inside me, I lunged forward, driving the bone knife deep into the Nahulo's side. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The creature let out a shriek of pain and fury unlike anything I had ever heard. Its skin began to smoke and bubble where the knife had pierced it, as if the very touch of the blade was poison. But it wasn't enough. The Nahulo whirled, its massive arm catching me across the chest and sending me flying. I slammed into a tree, stars exploding behind my eyes as the breath was driven from my lungs. Through the haze of pain, I saw Kyoki charge forward, his own knife flashing in the dim light. The old man moved with a speed and grace that belied his years, ducking under the Nahulo's claws and striking again and again. I struggled to my feet, ignoring the screaming protests of my battered body. We had to end this here and now. As Kyoki kept the creature distracted, I circled around behind it, gathering every ounce of strength I had left. With a final desperate lunge, I drove the bone knife into the base of the Nahulo's skull. The blade sank into the hilt, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then the creature began to change. Its form shimmered and warped, as if it was being pulled apart from the inside. A high, keening wail filled the air, rising to a pitch that made my ears ring. And then, in a final burst of otherworldly light, the Nahulo simply vanished. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood there, panting and shaking, the bone knife still clutched in my trembling hand. Kyoki limped over to me, his face pale but his eyes shining with a fierce pride. "It's done," he said softly, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Hatapa. You saved us all." As the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, we made our way back to the reservation. The story of what had happened that night would be told and retold for generations to come. But in that moment, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness and a profound sense of relief. The Nahulo was gone, banished back to whatever dark realm it had come from. Our people were safe. And yet, as I looked out over the forest that had been both my home and my battlefield, I knew that this was not truly an ending. It was a beginning, the start of a new chapter in the ancient, ongoing story of our people in the land we called home. In the years that followed, I took on the mantle of protector, just as Kyoki had before me. I watched over the reservation, always vigilant for signs that the darkness might return. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars blazed overhead, I would remember that summer of 1985, when I learned the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family and community. The bone knife hangs on my wall now, a reminder of battles fought and won, and of the responsibility that comes with knowledge. For I know that while the Nahulo may be gone, there are other secrets lurking in the shadows of this ancient land. And when the time comes, I'll be ready to face them, just as those who came before me did, and as those who will come after me must do. For this is our home, our legacy, and we will always stand guard against the darkness, no matter what form it may take. This happened in the 80s, in the summer of 1986. I was 32 years old then, living in a small town called Pine Hollow, nestled in the dense forests of Oregon. My name is Cyrus Palmer, though most folks around town just called me Cy. I worked as a mechanic at Joe's auto shop, the only garage in our little slice of nowhere. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept food on the table and a roof over my head. Pine Hollow was one of those places where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the kind of town where leaving your front door unlocked wasn't just common, it was expected. The most excitement we usually got was when Old Man Johnson's prized rooster escaped, leading half the town on a wild goose chase, or should I say a wild rooster chase. My life was simple, predictable. I'd wake up, go to work, fix cars, grab a beer with the guys at the Rusty Nail, our local watering hole, and head home. Weekends were for fishing at Crescent Lake or catching the game on TV. Adventure wasn't really my thing. I was content with my quiet life, or so I thought. It was a Friday in late July when everything changed. The air was thick with humidity, making the shop feel like a sauna. I just finished up a tricky transmission job on Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick when my buddy, Frank Garrett, burst into the garage. Frank was a bear of a man, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His wild, unkempt beard made him look like he'd stepped right out of the pages of a Jack London novel. Despite his intimidating appearance, Frank had a heart of gold and an infectious enthusiasm for the great outdoors. "Cy," he boomed, his voice echoing off the garage walls. "You, me, camping trip this weekend. What do you say?" I wiped my greasy hands on a rag and raised an eyebrow. Frank, you know that's not really my scene. I've got plans to catch the Blazers game on Sunday. Frank's bushy eyebrows furrowed. Plans? Sitting on your couch with a six-pack isn't plans, Si. Come on, when's the last time you did something exciting? 2 days out in the wild. We'll fish, drink beer, and just relax. No phones, no worries. It'll be great. I hesitated, but Frank's enthusiasm was hard to resist. Plus, he had a point. When was the last time I'd done something spontaneous? All right, I conceded. But if I get eaten by a bear, I'm blaming you. Frank's laughter boomed through the garage. That's the spirit. I'll pick you up at dawn. Pack light and don't forget your fishing gear. As Frank left, a mix of excitement and apprehension settled in my gut. What had I just agreed to? The next morning, true to his word, Frank's beat-up Ford F-150 rumbled up to my driveway just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. I tossed my hastily packed duffel bag and fishing rod into the truck bed and climbed into the passenger seat. Ready for an adventure, city boy? Frank grinned, revving the engine. Born ready, I lied, stifling a yawn. Where exactly are we headed? Frank's eyes twinkled with mischief. I found this amazing spot deep in the Willamette National Forest. It's off the beaten path, but trust me, it's worth it. Crystal clear river, great fishing, and not another soul for miles. As we drove out of Pine Hollow, the familiar sights of our small town gave way to dense forest. The road narrowed and became rougher, the trees pressing in on both sides. After about 2 hours of driving, including a good 45 minutes on a barely there dirt road, Frank finally pulled to a stop. We're here, he announced proudly. I stepped out of the truck, stretching my stiff muscles, and took in our surroundings. Frank hadn't been exaggerating. The place was beautiful. We were in a small clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs and cedars. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and earth. A short distance away, I could hear the gentle babbling of a river. We spent the next couple of hours setting up camp. Frank, ever the outdoorsman, had brought a spacious 4-person tent, which we pitched near the edge of the clearing. We gathered firewood, set up our camping chairs, and got our fishing gear ready. As the afternoon wore on, we made our way to the river. The water was indeed crystal clear, and I could see trout darting beneath the surface. We found a good spot and cast our lines, the only sound the gentle rush of the water and the occasional plop of our lures hitting the surface. This is the life, Si? Frank said, taking a swig from his beer can. I had to admit he was right. The stress of the work week seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. We fished until the sun began to dip below the tree line, managing to catch a few decent-sized rainbow trout. Back at the campsite, Frank expertly filleted the fish while I got the fire going. The smell of trout cooking over an open flame filled the air, making my mouth water. We ate our catch, complemented by some baked beans Frank had brought along, and washed it all down with cold beer. As night fell, the forest around us came alive with sound. Crickets chirped, owls hooted, and in the distance we could hear the haunting call of a loon. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the trees surrounding our little clearing. Frank was in the middle of recounting one of his legendary fishing tales, this one involving a catfish the size of a small car, when we heard it. A rustling in the bushes, just beyond the circle of firelight. We both fell silent, straining our ears. Probably just a raccoon, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. But there was something about the sound that set my teeth on edge. It didn't move like a raccoon. Frank's expression grew serious, his usual joviality replaced by a look of concern. We both grabbed our flashlights and shone them towards the source of the noise. For a moment, all we saw were the dense underbrush and the occasional gleam of light reflecting off leaves. Then we saw it, a pair of eyes, low to the ground, glowing eerily in the beam of our lights. They were unlike any animal eyes I'd ever seen, too big for a coyote, too low for a bear, and filled with an intelligence that sent a shiver down my spine. Must be a deer or something, Frank said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Yeah, a deer, I echoed, though my gut told me otherwise. Whatever was watching us from the darkness, it was no deer. The eyes disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, and the forest seemed to hold its breath for a moment before the usual night sounds resumed. We tried to shrug it off, to go back to our easy camaraderie. But something had changed. The comfortable atmosphere of earlier was gone, replaced by a tension that hung in the air like a fog. We turned in early that night, both of us making excuses about being tired from the drive and the fishing. As I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the stars through the mesh of the tent roof, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. It was just nerves, I told myself, city boy scared of the dark forest. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was being jolted awake by a sound that made my blood run cold. A scream. Not an animal sound, but a human scream filled with terror and pain. It was Frank. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The clearing was bathed in pale moonlight, casting everything in an eerie, silvery glow. Frank was standing by the river, his flashlight on the ground, pointing at something I couldn't see. "Frank," I yelled, running over to him. "What the hell's going on?" He didn't respond, just kept staring at something in the darkness. I picked up his fallen flashlight and shone it in the direction he was looking. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, just at the edge of the river, was a figure, but it wasn't human, at least not entirely. It was hunched over with long, gangly limbs and matted fur that looked black in the moonlight. Its eyes, those same eyes we'd seen earlier, glowed back at us with an otherworldly light. But it was the face that truly terrified me. It was like a twisted mix of a wolf and a man, with a long snout full of sharp teeth and ears that came to points atop its head. We both stood frozen, not knowing what to do. The creature, I didn't have a name for it, my mind refusing to use the word that kept trying to surface, stared at us, its lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed rows of gleaming teeth. Then, with a speed I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, the creature lunged at Frank. I barely had time to react. Without thinking, I swung the heavy flashlight as hard as I could, connecting with the creature's head with a sickening thud. It let out a snarl, a guttural sound that I felt deep in my bones. The creature stumbled back, shaking its head, but I knew it was only momentarily stunned. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Frank's arm and pulling him with me. We sprinted back to our camp, grabbing our bags and whatever gear we could in our panic. I could hear the creature behind us, its footsteps pounding like a drumbeat in the dark. We didn't stop running until we reached Frank's truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. Just as I managed to start the engine, the creature slammed into the side of the truck, rocking it violently. I gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. We tore out of there like the devil himself was on our tail, the truck bouncing and shuddering on the rough road. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the creature standing in the middle of the road, its eyes glowing in the red glare of the taillights before the darkness swallowed it up. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of Pine Hollow. Frank was pale and shaking, and I wasn't feeling much better. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound our ragged breathing as we tried to process what had just happened. What the hell was that?" I finally managed to say. Frank shook his head slowly. "I don't know, Si," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been camping in these woods my whole life. I've never seen anything like that. Never even heard stories about anything like that." We decided not to tell anyone about our encounter. Who would believe us anyway? Two guys claiming they were chased by some kind of monster in the woods? We'd be laughed out of town or worse, accused of being drunk or high. So we kept it to ourselves, but it changed us. I couldn't shake the image of that creature. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its glowing eyes, its twisted, snarling face. I started having nightmares, vivid dreams where I was running through endless dark forests, always with the sound of heavy footsteps right behind me. Frank withdrew into himself. He stopped coming by the garage to chat, stopped going to the Rusty Nail. When I did see him around town, he looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted look on his face. We tried to go back to our normal lives, but things weren't the same. Work at the garage became a welcome distraction, a way to keep my hands and mind busy. But every time I heard an unexpected noise, every time a shadow moved in the corner of my eye, I felt that same paralyzing fear I'd experienced in the woods. A few weeks after our camping trip, the first reports started coming in. A group of hikers had gone missing in the Willamette National Forest. The police found their campsite torn apart, with no sign of the people who had been there. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. Then came more disappearances. A pair of newlyweds on their honeymoon, a father and son on a fishing trip. Each time the story was the same. Campsite destroyed, no bodies found, no traces left behind. Frank and I exchanged worried glances when we heard the news, but said nothing. We both knew what had happened, but we were too scared to speak up. What could we say? That a monster was stalking the woods? They'd think we were crazy. As summer turned to fall, the disappearances continued. The local police were baffled. Search parties combed the woods but found nothing. Wild animal attacks were suggested, then dismissed. The destruction at the campsites was too thorough, too deliberate for a bear or a cougar. Rumors started to spread through Pine Hollow. Some said it was a serial killer. Others whispered about government experiments gone wrong or aliens. A few of the older folks in town muttered about ancient Native American legends, spirits of the forest that punish those who disrespected nature. Through it all, Frank and I kept our silence. The guilt ate at me. I should have done something, said something. But every time I thought about going to the police, I remembered the creature's glowing eyes, its inhuman strength, and the words died in my throat. Then, one crisp October morning, Frank disappeared. I was at work when I heard the news. Frank's wife, Linda, came into the garage, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Frank had gone out for his usual morning walk in the woods behind their house and never came back. The whole town turned out for the search. We combed the woods for days, calling Frank's name until our voices were hoarse. But it was like he'd vanished into thin air. Deep down, I knew what had happened. The creature had gotten him. As the days turned to weeks with no sign of Frank, the town's mood darkened. People started locking their doors at night. Parents wouldn't let their kids play in the woods anymore. The carefree, trusting atmosphere of Pine Hollow was gone, replaced by a cloud of fear and suspicion. The guilt and fear began to consume me. I started drinking more, trying to drown out the memories and the constant gnawing dread. I became a shadow of my former self, barely holding on to my job at the garage. Every night I'd sit by the window, staring out into the darkness, half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching me from the tree line. As winter settled over Pine Hollow, the disappearances stopped. Some people thought it was over, that whatever had been taking people had moved on or gone into hibernation, but I knew better. I could feel it out there, waiting. One night, after one too many whiskeys, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. The guilt, the fear, the not knowing, it was all too much. I grabbed my hunting rifle and a flashlight, and I headed back to the woods where it had all begun. It was a stupid, reckless plan, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to lose. The cold winter air bit at my face as I drove out to the campsite. The trees were bare now, their skeletal branches reaching up to a sky heavy with the promise of snow. I parked Frank's truck. Linda had given it to me after the funeral. A funeral with no body, just an empty casket and a lot of unanswered questions, and made my way into the woods. The beam of my flashlight seemed feeble against the pressing darkness. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. Finally, I reached the clearing where we had camped that fateful night. The fire pit was still there, now cold and covered in a layer of dead leaves. I walked to the edge of the river, my boots crunching on the thin layer of ice that had formed along the bank. The night was silent, almost too silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Come on, you bastard!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice sounding thin and weak in the vast silence of the forest. "I know you're out there. Come and get me." For a long moment there was nothing. Then I heard it, a rustling in the underbrush behind me. I spun around, my rifle at the ready, heart pounding in my chest. The creature stepped out from between the trees, its eyes glowing that sickly yellow-green in the beam of my flashlight. It was just as I remembered. The twisted, wolf-like face, the long, gangly limbs, the matted fur. But now, seeing it in the stark light of my flashlight rather than the shadows of that summer night, I noticed more details. Its fur was a mottled gray and brown, with patches missing in places, revealing scarred skin underneath. Its hands, if you could call them that, ended in long, curved claws that looked capable of tearing through flesh like paper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and aimed my rifle. The creature tilted its head, almost curiously, as if it couldn't quite understand what I was doing. For a split second, I hesitated. Was there something almost human in those eyes? That moment of hesitation nearly cost me my life. Before I could pull the trigger, the creature leapt at me with that impossible speed. I managed to fire off a shot, but in my panic it went wide, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the silent forest. The force of the creature's leap knocked me to the ground, the rifle flying from my hands. We struggled, rolling on the frozen ground. Its breath was hot on my face, reeking of decay and something metallic. Blood, I realized with horror. I felt its claws dig into my arm, tearing through my jacket and into the flesh beneath. The pain was excruciating, but the rush of adrenaline kept me fighting. I managed to get my legs under the creature's body and kicked with all my might, sending it tumbling off me. I scrambled to my feet, looking wildly around for my rifle. I spotted it a few yards away and lunged for it. Just as my hand closed around the stock of the rifle, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Another howl, deeper and more menacing than the first, coming from the other side of the clearing. I spun around, rifle clutched to my chest, and felt my heart skip a beat. Another creature had emerged from the trees. This one was larger, its fur a darker shade, almost black in the moonlight. It stood on its hind legs, easily 7 feet tall, with muscles rippling under its fur. The two creatures faced each other, lips pulled back in twin snarls. For a moment I was forgotten as they sized each other up. Then, with a roar that shook the very air, they charged at each other. The fight was brutal and savage. Claws flashed in the moonlight, tearing chunks of fur and flesh. Jaws snapped, seeking vulnerable points. They moved with a speed that seemed impossible for creatures their size, circling and lunging at each other in a deadly dance. I knew I should run, that this was my chance to escape while they were distracted. But I was transfixed by the sight, unable to look away. As I watched, I began to notice something odd. The larger creature seemed to be protecting me? Every time the first creature tried to break away from the fight and come at me, the larger one would cut it off, forcing it back into combat. The battle seemed to last for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, with a move almost too fast to follow, the larger creature got its jaws around the throat of the smaller one. There was a sickening crunch, and the smaller creature went limp. The victorious creature dropped its opponent's lifeless body to the ground and turned to face me. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep it aimed. The creature took a step towards me, then another. I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. But the attack never came. Instead, I heard a soft whine, almost like a dog's. I opened my eyes to see the creature sitting on its haunches a few feet away, watching me intently. As I stared, dumbfounded, its form began to shift and change. The fur receded, the snout shortened, the ears moved down the sides of the head. Within moments where the creature had been, there now sat a man I recognized. "Frank," I whispered, not believing my eyes. He nodded slowly, his eyes, human eyes now, but with a hint of that otherworldly glow still in them, filled with sadness and something else. Shame, maybe? "I'm sorry, Si," he said, his voice rough and gravelly, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I lowered my rifle, my mind reeling. "But how? You disappeared. We all thought you were dead." Frank shook his head. "I wish I could explain it all. That night in the woods, when that thing attacked us, it bit me. I didn't realize it at the time, thought it was just a scratch. But then the changes started happening." He looked down at his hands, human hands now, but I could still see the power in them, the potential for claws. I tried to fight it, to control it, but when the full moon came, I couldn't stop it. I became that. I sank to the ground, the cold seeping through my jeans unnoticed. "The disappearances. Was that you?" Frank's face crumpled in anguish. "Some of them, not all. There are others out there, Si. Other things like me." I've been trying to stop them, to protect people, but I'm not always successful. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all. Werewolves. The word I'd been avoiding all this time finally surfaced. My best friend was a werewolf. It sounded insane, like something out of a B-movie, and yet I'd seen it with my own eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you let us all think you were dead?" Frank looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that seemed almost too big for his human form to contain. "How could I, Cy? How could I tell Linda, tell the town what I'd become? I'm a monster." I shook my head, surprising myself with the vehemence of the gesture. No, you're not. You're my friend. You just saved my life." Frank smiled sadly. "Maybe, but I'm dangerous, Cy. I can't control it, not completely. It's safer for everyone if I stay away." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened, everything we'd learned, settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, I stood up, wincing at the pain in my arm where the other creature had clawed me. "Come back with me," I said. "We'll figure this out. There has to be a way to control it, or cure it, or something." Frank shook his head. "I can't. It's too risky, but thank you for not seeing me as a monster." He stood up, his movements fluid and graceful in a way they had never been before. "I have to go. There are others out there, others I need to stop, but Cy, be careful. That scratch on your arm, you might start experiencing changes soon." I looked down at my arm, at the torn flesh visible through my shredded jacket, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Frank stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. "If it happens, if you start to change, come find me. I'll help you through it." And with that, he turned and loped off into the forest, quickly disappearing among the trees. I stood there for a long time, staring after him, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made my way back to Frank's truck. As I drove back to Pine Hollow, my arm throbbing and my head spinning, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I left Pine Hollow a week later. I couldn't stay, not with the knowledge of what was out there, what I might become. I drove west until I hit the coast, then headed south. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to keep moving. For years, I drifted from town to town, taking odd jobs as a mechanic when I needed money. Every full moon, I'd head deep into the wilderness, terrified of what might happen. But the change never came. Whatever Frank thought he saw in that scratch, it wasn't enough to turn me. I never saw Frank again, but sometimes when I'm in a forest and the moon is full, I think I hear a howl in the distance, and I wonder if he's out there, still fighting, still protecting people from the monsters in the dark. As for me, I've learned to live with the knowledge of what's out there. I've made a life for myself, found a measure of peace, but I never go camping anymore, and I always lock my doors at night. Because now I know the truth. The monsters are real. They're out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. And sometimes, the monsters wear the faces of those we love. This happened in 1982. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a chance to escape the relentless pace of city life and reconnect with nature. Instead, it became a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name is Felix Montero, and in 1982, at the age of 28, I made the fateful decision to take my RV deep into the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. I had always been drawn to solitude, finding comfort in the quiet spaces away from the constant buzz of technology and human interaction. My job as a software engineer in Little Rock kept me tethered to screens and surrounded by the incessant chatter of coworkers. The idea of a week alone in the wilderness seemed like the perfect antidote to the stress that had been building up over months of late nights and tight deadlines. As I drove deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air grew cooler, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a world away from the stuffy office I'd left behind, and I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. I found a secluded spot near a small, pristine lake. The water was so clear I could see fish darting beneath the surface. Setting up camp, I felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. This was going to be the reset I desperately needed. The first couple of days passed uneventfully. I hiked nearby trails, marveling at the lush greenery and diverse wildlife. I attempted to fish, though my efforts were more comical than successful. In the evenings I sat by the campfire, reading by its flickering light and gazing up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. It was on the third day that things began to change. I decided to explore a bit further from camp, packing a small day pack with water, snacks, and a map. As I walked, I came across an overgrown path that didn't appear on any of my maps. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The path led me to a small clearing where stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were grimy, the wood weathered and rotting in places. Something about it sent a chill down my spine, but my curiosity overrode my caution. I approached slowly, listening for any sounds of habitation. Hearing nothing, I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The interior was sparse and dusty. A table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf lined one wall. What caught my eye was a leather-bound journal sitting on the table. I picked it up, flipping through pages filled with cramped, barely legible handwriting. The dates at the top of the pages were from the 1950s. As I was examining the journal, I heard a noise outside, the snap of a twig, followed by the rustling of leaves. My heart rate spiked. "Hello," I called out, but there was no response. Just an eerie silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I quickly left the cabin, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As I made my way back to my campsite, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. But the forest remained still and silent. That night, as I lay in my RV trying to sleep, the sounds of the forest seemed amplified. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves had me on edge. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the unfamiliarity of the wilderness playing tricks on my city-trained senses. But then I heard it. Footsteps, crunching through the leaves, circling my RV. They were too heavy, too deliberate to be an animal. My breath caught in my throat as they drew nearer. Suddenly there was a sharp knock on the door. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Who could it be, out here in the middle of nowhere? I debated pretending I wasn't there, but curiosity and fear warred within me. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and approached the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Is anyone there?" Silence. I opened the door slowly, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through the night, illuminating trees and underbrush, but no sign of anyone. I stepped out, sweeping the light in a wide arc. That's when I saw it. A shadow, human-shaped, darting between the trees. It was there for just a moment, then gone, leaving me to question if I'd really seen anything at all. I retreated back into the RV, locking the door and checking it twice. Sleep eluded me that night. Every sound, every shadow had me on high alert. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted and on edge. In the light of day, I tried to rationalize what I'd experienced. Maybe it was just my imagination, fueled by too many horror movies and the isolation of the forest. I decided to stick to more familiar areas that day, hoping to shake off the lingering unease. I spent the morning kayaking on the lake, the repetitive motion of paddling helping to calm my nerves. The water was like glass, reflecting the sky and surrounding trees in perfect detail. For a while, I managed to forget the events of the previous night, but as I returned to shore, that sense of peace was shattered. There were footprints in the mud near my campsite, heavy boot prints that were decidedly not mine. They led from the edge of the woods right up to my RV door, then back into the forest. My heart began to race. This was no trick of the imagination. Someone had been here, circling my campsite while I slept. The thought sent a chill through me, despite the warm afternoon sun. I debated packing up and leaving right then, but a part of me, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and puzzles, wanted answers. Who was out there? What did they want? Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the tracks. They led me deeper into the forest, away from the familiar trails I'd been sticking to. The trees seemed to grow denser, the underbrush thicker. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep its secrets. After about 20 minutes of walking, I came upon a sight that made my blood run cold. It was a makeshift campsite, but unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Strung up in the trees were animal bones, clacking together in the breeze like some macabre wind chime. In the center was a fire pit filled with ashes and what looked disturbingly like larger, human-sized bones. Hanging from a nearby branch was a small object that looked like a charm or talisman. As I drew closer, I realized with horror that it was made of twigs bound together with what appeared to be human hair. This was no ordinary camper. This was something much, much worse. I turned to leave, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I heard it, a low, menacing chuckle that seemed to come from all around me. "Lost, are we?" a voice rasped. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep the fear from my voice. From behind a large oak tree stepped a man, if you could call him that. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes hanging off him in tatters. His face was a mask of dirt and wild matted hair. But what struck me most were his eyes. They gleamed with a feral intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice a low growl. I took a step back. "I'm sorry, I didn't know this area was off limits. I'll just be going now." He tilted his head, regarding me with those unnerving eyes. "Oh, it's not about limits," he said, taking a step toward me. "It's about prey." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the branches that whipped at my face and arms. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps surprisingly quick for someone who looked so emaciated. "Come back," he called, his voice filled with a terrible glee. "We're just getting started." I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my legs aching. But fear is a powerful motivator, and somehow I managed to stay ahead. Finally, I burst into the clearing where my RV was parked. I scrambled inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I could hear him outside, circling the vehicle, occasionally tapping on the windows. Come out," he crooned. "Don't you want to play?" I huddled in the back of the RV, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I was miles from any help, with a madman lurking outside. My hands shook as I reached for my keys. I had to get out of here. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the driver's seat. I could still hear him outside, his footsteps crunching in the leaves. I took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I heard a howl of rage from outside. I didn't look back. I threw the RV into drive and tore out of the clearing, branches scraping against the sides as I maneuvered through the tight spaces between trees. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road, and even then I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that wild-eyed man chasing after me. It wasn't until I was safely back in the city, surrounded by the comforting sounds of traffic and people, that I finally allowed myself to relax. But the fear lingered, along with the questions. Who was that man? How long had he been living in those woods? And how many others had stumbled upon his campsite, never to be seen again? I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? A software engineer claiming to have been chased through the woods by some feral mountain man? It sounded crazy, even to my own ears. But I never forgot. The nightmares plagued me for years. Dreams of being chased through endless woods, of bones clacking in the wind, of wild eyes gleaming in the darkness. I never went camping again. The drive back to Little Rock was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig had me flinching. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just days ago now felt oppressive, hiding untold horrors behind its verdant facade. As the trees thinned out and gave way to the familiar sights of civilization, gas stations, billboards, houses, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But it was short-lived. The safety of the city couldn't erase what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the RV just yet. I sat there, engine off, staring blankly at the steering wheel. The events of the past few days played on repeat in my mind. The cabin, the journal, the horrifying campsite, and those wild, hungry eyes. Eventually, I managed to drag myself inside my apartment. The familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but instead, they felt alien. How could everything here be so normal when my world had been turned upside down? I took a long, hot shower, scrubbing my skin raw, as if I could wash away the memories along with the dirt and sweat. But no amount of soap could cleanse my mind of what I'd seen. That night, I lay awake in bed, every creak of the building, every distant car horn making me jump. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with nightmarish visions, twisted figures dancing around a bonfire made of human bones, a forest alive with watching eyes, and always that man, chasing me through endless woods. I woke up screaming, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. I knew sleep wouldn't come again, so I got up and made coffee, watching the sky slowly lighten as dawn approached. As the city came to life around me, I tried to figure out what to do next. Should I report what happened? But what exactly would I say? That I'd stumbled upon some kind of cannibal's lair in the middle of the Ouachita National Forest? That I'd been chased by a man who looked more animal than human? It sounded insane, even to my own ears. I considered calling in sick to work, but the thought of sitting alone in my apartment with nothing but my thoughts for company was unbearable. So I got dressed and went in, hoping that the familiar routine would help ground me. But as I sat at my desk, staring at lines of code that suddenly seemed meaningless, I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the forest, to that leather-bound journal I'd left behind in the cabin. What secrets did it hold? And how many others had encountered that man in the woods? How many hadn't been as lucky as I was? My coworkers noticed something was off. "Rough camping trip, Felix?" one of them asked, noting the dark circles under my eyes and my jumpy demeanor. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, you could say that. Turns out I'm not cut out for the great outdoors." If only they knew. Days passed, then weeks. I tried to move on, to forget what had happened. But the memories lingered, coloring everything I did. I became paranoid, always looking over my shoulder, startling at sudden noises. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even in the heart of the city. I started researching, spending hours online looking for any information about strange occurrences in the Ouachita National Forest. Most of what I found was typical cryptid stuff. Bigfoot sightings, UFO encounters, nothing that matched what I'd experienced. But then I stumbled upon an old newspaper article from 1953. It detailed the disappearance of a family of 4 who had been camping in the area where I'd had my encounter. The article mentioned that rangers had found their campsite in disarray, with strange symbols carved into nearby trees and unidentifiable bones scattered around the fire pit. My blood ran cold as I read those words. It was too similar to what I'd seen to be a coincidence. The article went on to say that despite an extensive search, the family was never found. That night, the nightmares were worse than ever. I dreamed I was back in that clearing, but this time I wasn't alone. The missing family was there, their faces twisted in terror as they were surrounded by shadowy figures. I tried to help them, to warn them, but no sound came out when I opened my mouth. I could only watch in horror as the shadows closed in. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. As I lay there trying to calm my breathing, a thought occurred to me, a thought so chilling it made my blood run cold. What if he followed me? The idea was irrational, I knew. Little Rock was hours away from where I'd had my encounter, but once the thought took root, I couldn't shake it. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every stranger on the street a potential danger. I started taking precautions. I installed a security system in my apartment, complete with cameras. I changed my routines, never leaving or returning home at the same time 2 days in a row. I even considered buying a gun, something I'd never thought I'd do. My work started to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, constantly jumping at every little noise. My boss called me into his office one day, concern evident on his face. "Felix, is everything okay?" he asked. "You've seemed distracted lately. If there's anything going on, anything you need to talk about." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unburden myself, to share the weight of the secret that was crushing me. But I couldn't. He'd think I was crazy. Hell, sometimes I thought I was crazy. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just haven't been sleeping well. I'll do better, I promise." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. I threw myself into my work after that, staying late at the office because I didn't want to go home to an empty apartment filled with shadows and memories. Months passed. Slowly, ever so slowly, the raw terror began to fade. The nightmares became less frequent, though they never went away entirely. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I could put this behind me. And then the package arrived. It was a small brown paper-wrapped parcel with no return address. My hands shook as I opened it, a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. Inside was the leather-bound journal from the cabin. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, unable to believe what I was seeing. How? How could this be here? With trembling hands, I opened it. A slip of paper fell out, covered in the same cramped handwriting I remembered from the journal. It contained just 5 words. I know where you live. The world seemed to tilt around me. I stumbled to the window, frantically scanning the street below, and there, across the road, partially hidden behind a tree, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, watching. Our eyes met and he smiled, a feral grin that sent chills down my spine. Then he melted back into the shadows, leaving me to question if he'd ever really been there at all. I slammed the window shut and locked it, then did the same with every door and window in my apartment. My mind was racing. How had he found me? How long had he been watching? And what did he want? With shaking hands, I picked up the journal again. I knew I should call the police, but what would I tell them? That I was being stalked by a maybe cannibal from the woods? That he'd somehow gotten into my apartment to leave this journal? They'd think I was insane. So instead, I started reading. The journal belonged to a man named William Blackburn. The entries started in 1951, detailing his move to the Ouachita National Forest. At first, it seemed normal enough. The musings of a man seeking solitude in nature. But as I read on, the entries became increasingly disturbing. Blackburn wrote about hearing voices in the woods, about shadows that moved on their own. He described rituals he performed to appease what he called the forest spirits. These rituals started small, leaving out food offerings, carving symbols into trees. But they escalated quickly. The last dated entry was from June 1953. It chilled me to the bone. The spirits are angry. They demand a greater sacrifice. I've seen a family camping nearby. They'll do nicely. May God forgive me. I felt sick. This had to be the family from the newspaper article I'd found. Blackburn had... No, I couldn't even bring myself to think it. But if this journal was from 1953, how did it end up in that cabin in 1982? And more importantly, how did it find its way to me now in 1983? I spent the next few days in a state of heightened anxiety, jumping at every sound, constantly checking and rechecking the locks. I called in sick to work, unable to focus on anything but the journal and its implications. I pored over every page looking for clues, for anything that might explain what was happening. But the more I read, the less sense it all made. Blackburn's writings became increasingly incoherent towards the end, filled with rambling descriptions of rituals and dark, otherworldly entities. On the 3rd night after receiving the journal, I was startled awake by a noise. It was subtle, just the faint creak of a floorboard. But in the silence of the night, it might as well have been a gunshot. Someone was in my apartment. I lay frozen in bed, hardly daring to breathe. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate, moving from the living room towards my bedroom. My eyes darted to the baseball bat I kept by my bed, but I couldn't bring myself to move, terrified that any sound would give away that I was awake. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I could see the shadow of feet in the crack beneath it. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then slowly the doorknob began to turn. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was sheer terror-fueled adrenaline. But just as the door began to open, I leapt out of bed, grabbed the bat, and charged. I caught a glimpse of a tall, gaunt figure before I swung the bat with all my might. There was a sickening thud and a howl of pain. I didn't stop to see what damage I'd done. I ran out of the bedroom, through the living room, and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, barefoot and still in my pajamas. The officers on duty looked at me like I was crazy as I babbled about intruders and journals and men from the woods. But something in my wild-eyed terror must have convinced them, because they sent a car to check out my apartment. They found signs of a break-in and blood on the floor of my bedroom. But there was no sign of the intruder. The journal was gone too. In the days that followed, I gave statement after statement to the police. They increased patrols in my neighborhood, dusted for fingerprints, but found nothing conclusive. As far as they were concerned, it was just a random break-in, nothing more. But I knew better. I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I couldn't stay in Little Rock. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming. So I ran. I quit my job, sold or gave away most of my possessions, and hit the road. I've been moving ever since, never staying in one place for too long. Always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for that moment when I'll turn around and see those wild, hungry eyes staring back at me. Sometimes in my darker moments, I wonder if I'm going crazy. If maybe that trip to the woods broke something in my mind, and all of this is just some elaborate delusion. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a tall, gaunt figure in a crowd, or I'll wake up to find a twig and hair charm left outside my motel room door. And I know it's all real, and I know he's still out there, following me, hunting me. I don't know how this will end. Maybe one day he'll catch up to me. Maybe one day I'll stop running. But for now, all I can do is keep moving, keep hiding, and hope that somehow, someday, this nightmare will end. But deep down, I know the truth. You can't outrun the woods forever. Sooner or later, the woods catch up to you. And when they do, they don't let go. This is my story, my warning. If you're ever in the Ouachita National Forest and you come across an overgrown path or a dilapidated cabin, turn back. Don't let curiosity get the better of you. Don't make the same mistake I did, because once the woods have your scent, they never forget. And they never, ever forgive. It's been a year since that night in my apartment. A year of running, hiding, always looking over my shoulder. I've crisscrossed the country, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks. Motels, campgrounds, the occasional kind stranger's couch. Anywhere I can lay my head and pretend, just for a moment, that I'm safe. But I'm never safe. Not really. I've seen him everywhere I go. A glimpse of a tall, gaunt figure in a crowded street. A shadow moving in ways shadows shouldn't move. Once in a small town in Nevada, I woke up to find a circle of those twisted twig and hair charms surrounding my motel room. I left town that same hour, driving until my eyes could barely stay open. The constant fear, the lack of sleep, it's all taking its toll. I look in the mirror and barely recognize myself anymore. My hair has gone prematurely gray, my face lined with worry and exhaustion. I've lost weight, too much weight. Food doesn't taste like anything anymore. But the worst part is the doubt. There are times, long dark nights when sleep won't come, that I wonder if I'm going insane. If maybe that trip to the woods broke something in my mind, and all of this is just some elaborate delusion my fractured psyche has conjured up. But then I'll find another charm, or I'll see those wild eyes staring at me from a crowd, and I know it's all real. I've tried to research, to understand what's happening to me. I've dug deep into folklore, into stories of wendigos and skinwalkers and other creatures that blur the line between man and monster. I've reached out to paranormal investigators, to self-proclaimed psychics and mediums. Most dismiss me as a crackpot. A few have tried to help, but their sage smudging and protective crystals do nothing to keep the nightmares at bay. One elderly woman, a retired anthropology professor I managed to track down, listened to my story with a grave expression. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "What you're describing," she said, her voice heavy with a weight I couldn't quite understand, "sounds like an old story, older than the hills themselves." She told me about ancient spirits, guardians of the wild places who didn't take kindly to human intrusion, about men who made bargains with these spirits, trading their humanity for power and long life. But such bargains always have a price, she warned, and sometimes that price is paid in blood. Her words haunted me long after I left her cluttered office. They rang in my ears as I drove through the night, always moving, always running. But you can't run forever. It was in a small town in Oregon that everything finally came to a head. I had been there for almost a month, longer than I'd stayed anywhere since Little Rock. The town was nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests that reminded me uncomfortably of the Ouachita. But it was approaching winter, and I was tired, so tired. I had rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town. It was isolated, but that suited me fine. I'd grown used to solitude over the past year, preferred it even. Other people asked too many questions, looked at me with too much suspicion or pity when they saw the haunted look in my eyes. It was a cold, clear night, the kind of night where the stars seem close enough to touch, and your breath hangs in the air like a ghost. I was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, when I heard it. A twig snapping in the forest, then another, and another. Footsteps, coming closer. My heart began to race, my palms sweating despite the chill in the air. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line. And there he was. He stepped out of the shadows like he was part of them, his tall, gaunt frame unmistakable. In the moonlight, I could see his face clearly for the first time since that day in the woods. It was more weathered now, the wild beard streaked with gray. But his eyes were the same, wild, hungry, inhuman. "Hello, Felix," he said, his voice a low rasp that sent chills down my spine. "It's been a while." I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to flee. But I was tired, so very tired. And I knew deep in my bones that this was it. This was where it would end, one way or another. "Who are you?" I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head, regarding me with those unnerving eyes. "Who am I?" he repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've had many names over the years. William Blackburn was one of them." My breath caught in my throat. "The journal." He nodded. "My journal. You read it, didn't you? Did you understand what you read?" I shook my head, confusion and fear warring within me. I don't understand any of this. The journal was from the 1950s. How? He laughed then, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Time means little in the deep woods, Felix. I've walked those forests for longer than you can imagine." He took a step closer, and I had to force myself not to back away. "As for what I want..." His eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I want what I've always wanted, what the woods demand." "A sacrifice," I whispered, remembering the last entry in the journal. He smiled, a terrible, feral grin. "Smart boy. Yes, a sacrifice. The woods are hungry, Felix, and you trespassed. You took something that wasn't yours to take." "The journal," I said, realization dawning, "but I didn't mean to." He waved a hand dismissively. "Intention matters little to the old powers. You took, and now a price must be paid." I felt a surge of anger then, cutting through the fear. "So what? You've been chasing me across the country for a year because of a book? Why didn't you just take it back when you broke into my apartment?" His grin widened. "Oh, Felix, the journal was just the beginning. You see, the moment you stepped into that cabin, the moment you touched that book, you became part of the story. My story. The woods story." He spread his arms wide, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw the shadows move with him, like great dark wings spreading out behind him. "You can't escape the woods, Felix," he said, his voice taking on an otherworldly resonance. "No one can, not really. The woods are everywhere, in every dark corner, in every shadow, and now they've come for you." The shadows around him seemed to deepen, to move in ways shadows shouldn't move. I felt a wave of primal terror wash over me, my legs trembling with the urge to run. But where would I run to? He was right. I'd been running for a year, and where had it gotten me? Right back where I started, face to face with the embodiment of my nightmares. In that moment, standing on the porch of a rented cabin in Oregon, staring into the eyes of a man who was no longer a man, I made a decision. I was done running. "No," I said, surprised at the strength in my voice. "No, I'm not going to be your sacrifice." He raised an eyebrow, amusement and something like respect flickering in his inhuman eyes. "Oh? And how do you propose to stop me?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I propose a bargain." His eyes widened slightly, a hungry light gleaming in them. "A bargain? Now that is interesting. What could you possibly have to offer, Felix?" I met his gaze steadily. "Myself, not as a sacrifice, but as an apprentice. Teach me. Show me the secrets of the woods. Let me take your place." For a long moment he was silent, those wild eyes boring into me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, could almost sense the ancient inhuman intelligence behind it weighing my words. Finally, he spoke. "You don't know what you're asking, Felix. The price, it's more than you can imagine." "I've been paying a price for the past year," I said. "Running, hiding, always looking over my shoulder, never knowing when or where you'd appear next. I'm tired of being the prey. If this is my fate, if I can't escape the woods, then I want to understand them. I want to be part of them." He tilted his head, a calculating look in his eyes. "And what of your old life? Your friends, your family, your work?" I laughed bitterly. "What life? I left all that behind a year ago. I have nothing left to lose." He nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the feral grin from before, but something older, more primal. It was the smile of a predator who had just caught particularly clever prey. "Very well, Felix," he said, extending a hand towards me. "I accept your bargain. Come, the woods are waiting." As I took his hand, I felt a shiver run through me, not of fear, but of anticipation, of power. The shadows around us deepened, swirling like mist. I caught one last glimpse of the cabin, of the normal world I was leaving behind, before the darkness swallowed us whole. In that moment, as the woods claimed me, I understood a fundamental truth. You can't outrun the woods forever, but maybe, just maybe, you can become part of them. And so began my new life, my apprenticeship to the woods. It's been difficult, painful. There are times I've wondered if death might have been a kinder fate, but I'm learning, growing, changing. I still dream of my old life sometimes, of the man I used to be, but those dreams are growing fainter, more distant, like memories of a life lived long ago. Now, when I walk through the forest, the trees whisper to me. The shadows move at my command, and sometimes on quiet nights I catch glimpses of people, campers, hikers, lost souls wandering where they don't belong. And I smile, a wild, hungry smile. After all, the woods are always hungry, and now so am I. So let this be a final warning. If you're ever in the deep woods and you see a tall, gaunt figure watching you from the shadows, run, run, and don't look back, because the woods are everywhere, and they're always, always hungry. Time moves differently in the deep woods. Days blend into nights, weeks into months, seasons into years. I couldn't tell you how long it's been since I took William's hand and stepped into the shadows. Time has lost all meaning here. The process of becoming, whatever it is I'm becoming, has been arduous, painful. There were times I thought I wouldn't survive it, times I wished I hadn't. William, if that's even his real name, is not a gentle teacher. He pushes me to my limits and beyond, forcing me to confront the darkest parts of myself, to embrace the wild, primal energy of the forest. The first lesson was the hardest. "You must let go," he told me, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Let go of your humanity, of your attachments to the world you left behind." I didn't understand at first. I thought I had already left everything behind. But William shook his head, a knowing smile on his face. "You still cling to your old self," he said, "to your memories, your sense of right and wrong. You must shed it all like a snake shedding its skin." And so began a grueling process of, I'm not sure what to call it, deprogramming, rebirth, torture. William would leave me alone in the deepest part of the forest for days on end, with no food, no water, nothing but the clothes on my back. I was forced to survive on my own, to learn the ways of the woods or perish. I learned to find water in plants, to hunt small game with nothing but sharpened sticks. I learned to move silently through the underbrush, to blend in with the shadows. But more than that, I learned to listen, to hear the whispers of the trees, the songs of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth itself. It was during one of these solitary periods that I experienced my first true communion with the forest. I had been alone for, I don't know how long, days, maybe weeks. I was weak from hunger, delirious from thirst. As I lay on the forest floor, certain I was about to die, I felt something, a presence. Not William, not anything human. It was the forest itself, vast and ancient and alive in ways I had never understood before. I felt it enter my mind, sifting through my thoughts and memories. I saw my old life flash before my eyes, my job, my friends, my family, all the things I had left behind, and then, one by one, I saw them dissolve. Like leaves scattered in the wind, they faded away, leaving behind emptiness, a void waiting to be filled. When William found me days later, he took one look at me and smiled. "Now," he said, "now you're ready to begin." What followed was a crash course in the old ways. William taught me about the spirits that inhabit the woods, the rituals to appease them, the sacrifices they demand. I learned about the power in blood, in bone, in flesh freely given. I learned to twist the shadows to my will, to speak to the animals, to read the future in the patterns of leaves and the flight of birds. But the most important lesson, the one that William emphasized above all others, was balance. The woods demand sacrifice, he told me, his voice grave, but they also give. For every life taken, new life springs forth. For every secret learned, one must be given up. This is the way of things. I came to understand that William, and now I, were not merely servants of the woods. We were guardians, keepers of an ancient balance. We protected the deep places from those who would exploit them, and in return, we were granted power beyond mortal ken. But power, as always, comes at a price. The changes were subtle at first. I noticed I could see better in the dark, could hear sounds from miles away. My sense of smell became so acute I could track an animal days after it had passed. But then the physical changes began. My hair grew longer, wilder, seeming to move of its own accord. My nails hardened into claws, my teeth. Well, let's just say I'm grateful for the beard that now covers most of my face. The most dramatic change, though, was in my eyes. Gone was the warm brown I'd had all my life. In their place were eyes of a deep, fathomless green, the green of the deepest parts of the forest where sunlight never reaches. William nodded approvingly when he saw them. "The woods have accepted you," he said. "You're one of us now." One of us. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they filled me with a sense of belonging I'd never felt before. As my power grew, so did my understanding of the role I now played. William and I were not the only guardians. There were others scattered throughout the wild places of the world. Some, like us, had once been human. Others? Well, the less said about them, the better. We communicated through dreams, through the whispers of trees and the howling of the wind. We shared knowledge, warned each other of threats, coordinated our efforts to maintain the balance. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the veil between worlds was thin, we would gather. Deep in the heart of the oldest forests, in groves so ancient they remembered the dawn of time, we would meet. These gatherings were intense, wild, primal. We danced under the moonlight, our bodies twisting into shapes no human could achieve. We sang songs in languages long forgotten by the world of men. We performed rituals that would drive a normal person mad. And sometimes, when the spirits demanded it, we hunted. I remember my first hunt clearly. A group of loggers had entered a protected part of the forest, intent on clear-cutting an area sacred to the old powers. We tried to warn them off using the usual tricks: strange noises in the night, unsettling visions, a general feeling of dread that permeated the camp. But they were stubborn, driven by greed and a disregard for the old ways. And so, on the night of the new moon, we hunted. I won't describe what happened. The memories still haunt me, human enough to feel guilt, but too far gone to truly regret my actions. Suffice to say, the loggers never returned, and the woods fed well that night. As the years passed, or what felt like years, time, as I said, moved strangely here. I grew into my role. I became as much a part of the forest as the trees themselves. I could travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, moving through the shadows as easily as walking. I learned to change my form, to take on the aspect of animals, or blend seamlessly into the vegetation. I could call up storms with a thought, make plants grow or wither at my command. But more than that, I learned to feel the rhythm of the forest, the ebb and flow of life and death, growth and decay. I became a conduit for the will of the woods, a living embodiment of nature's wild, untamed heart. And yet, there are times in the deepest part of the night when the moon is hidden and the stars are veiled that I remember. I remember the man I used to be, the life I left behind. In these moments, I wonder, did I make the right choice? Was the price I paid too high? But then the dawn comes, and with it the song of birds, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind through the trees. And I remember why I'm here, why I chose this path, because the woods are ancient and powerful and beautiful beyond measure, and they need protectors, guardians, those who understand the old ways and are willing to pay the price to keep them alive. So I continue my vigil. I walk the shadowed paths, I whisper to the trees, I dance with the wind. I protect what must be protected, and I take what must be taken. And if on your wanderings you find yourself in the deep woods, far from the beaten path, be careful, be respectful. Listen to the whispers of the trees and the warnings on the wind. Because the woods are alive, they're watching, and they're hungry. And somewhere out there, in the deepest shadows, I'm watching too. Not as Felix Montero, software engineer from Little Rock, but as something older, something wilder, something that was once a man but is now so much more. So heed my warning, all you who would venture into the wild places. Tread lightly, speak softly, and whatever you do, don't stray from the path, because in the deep woods where the old powers still hold sway, there are things far worse than death, and I should know, I'm one of them. Years have passed, perhaps decades. Time has lost all meaning in the deep woods where I now dwell. I've become one with the forest, a guardian of its ancient secrets and terrible power. But lately something has changed. A disturbance ripples through the trees, a whisper on the wind that speaks of impending doom. I feel it in my bones, in the very essence of my transformed being. The balance is shifting, and not in our favor. Humanity, in its relentless pursuit of progress, is encroaching further into the wild places than ever before. The old powers are stirring, angry and afraid. William, my mentor and the one who brought me into this world, has grown restless. I see it in his eyes, wilder than ever, a hunger that can no longer be sated by our usual rituals and sacrifices. The old ways are failing, he tells me one night, his voice a low growl that sends shivers through the forest. We need to do more. We need to remind them why they feared the woods in the first place. I know what he's suggesting, and it fills me with a dread I haven't felt since I was still fully human. We can't, I argue. The balance is already broken, he roars, his form shifting, growing larger, more monstrous. If we don't act now, there will be nothing left to protect. I want to argue further, but deep down I know he's right. The encroachment of the modern world is accelerating. Every day more forests fall to the chainsaw and bulldozer. The old spirits are retreating, their power waning. If we don't do something drastic, everything we've fought to protect will be lost. And so, with heavy hearts and wild eyes, we begin to plan. We reach out to the other guardians, calling them from the far corners of the earth. They come in ones and twos, materializing from the shadows, emerging from the earth itself. Some I recognize from our moonlit gatherings. Others are strange even to me, creatures of myth and legend I had thought long gone from this world. We gather in the heart of the oldest forest, in a grove so ancient it remembers the birth of the world. The air thrums with power, the very ground pulsing beneath our feet. And there, under a sky wheeling with stars no human eye has ever seen, we make our plans. It will be a war unlike any the modern world has ever seen. A war of shadow and terror, of primal fear and forgotten magic. We will remind humanity why their ancestors feared the dark, why they told stories of monsters in the woods and left offerings at the forest's edge. As the others talk and plan, I find myself withdrawing, doubt gnawing at me. Is this really the only way? Haven't I seen firsthand the cost of such violence, the pain it brings to both sides? I think back to my old life, to the man I used to be. Felix Montero, who loved technology and the bright lights of the city, who would have scoffed at the idea of ancient forest spirits and guardians who could shapeshift. What would he think of what I've become, of what I'm about to do? But then I look around at this gathering of ancient beings, at the desperation in their eyes, and I know there's no turning back. This is my world now, my family, and I will fight to protect it, no matter the cost. As dawn breaks and our council comes to an end, William approaches me. His eyes are gleaming with a fervor I've never seen before, his form flickering between man and something other. "Are you ready?" he asks, his voice resonating with power. I take a deep breath, feeling the forest breathe with me. The doubts are still there, but I push them aside. I made my choice long ago in a small cabin in Oregon. There's no going back now. "I'm ready," I say, and feel the last vestiges of Felix Montero slip away. We move out as one, melting into the shadows, becoming one with the forest. The war for the soul of the wild places is about to begin. And may whatever gods still listen have mercy on those who stand in our way. As we vanish into the depths of the forest, I can't help but whisper a final warning to the world I once knew. The woods are waking. The old powers are stirring. Be afraid of the dark once more, for we are coming, and with us comes a reckoning long overdue. And with that, we are gone, leaving nothing behind but a whisper on the wind and a chill in the air. The age of man is ending. The age of the wild has begun. The war began quietly, almost imperceptibly to the human world. We moved like whispers through the night, leaving only traces of our passage. Unexplained disappearances, strange sightings, a growing sense of unease that spread from the fringes of civilization inward. Our first targets were the loggers, the miners, the developers who sought to carve up the wild places for profit. We struck without mercy, leaving behind scenes of horror that defied explanation. Entire camps would vanish overnight, with only claw marks and strange symbols carved into trees as evidence that anyone had ever been there. As news of these incidents spread, so did the fear. People began to avoid the forests, to whisper about monsters and angry spirits. It was exactly what we wanted, to rekindle the old fears, to remind humanity why they had once trembled at the thought of the deep woods. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. The human world, for all its fear, continued to encroach. For every logging operation we shut down, 2 more would spring up. For every mine we collapsed, a new one would open. The relentless march of progress continued, heedless of the warnings we were sending. William grew more frantic, more violent. His attacks became less targeted, more indiscriminate. He would prowl the edges of small towns, snatching people from their beds, leaving behind scenes of carnage that even I found disturbing. "We need to strike at their heart," he snarled one night, his form flickering between man and beast. "We need to show them that nowhere is safe." I felt a chill run through me at his words. "What are you suggesting?" His eyes gleamed with a feral light. "The cities. We take the war to their cities." The other guardians murmured in agreement, their own forms shifting restlessly, but I felt a surge of resistance. "No," I said, surprised at the strength in my voice. "That's too far. We're supposed to be protectors, not destroyers." William rounded on me, his face contorting into something inhuman. "Protectors, look around you. What's left to protect? If we don't act now, there will be nothing left." I stood my ground, feeling the power of the forest flow through me. There has to be another way. This isn't balance, it's annihilation. For a moment I thought he might attack me, but then, slowly, he seemed to deflate. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked, his voice weary. "We've tried everything else." And in that moment, as I looked at William, my mentor, my friend, the one who had shown me the wonders and terrors of this world, I realized something. He was tired, so very tired. He had been fighting this war for centuries, watching the wild places shrink year by year, decade by decade. And now, faced with the possibility of losing everything, he was willing to become the very monster humans believed us to be. But I wasn't. Not yet. "We need to remind them," I said slowly, an idea forming. "Not just of their fear, but of their wonder, their connection to the natural world." The other guardians looked at me skeptically, but William's eyes narrowed. "Go on," he said. "We've been operating in secret, striking from the shadows. But what if we revealed ourselves? Not as monsters, but as guardians, as the spirits they once revered." There was a moment of stunned silence, then an eruption of voices. Some were outraged, others intrigued. William just watched me, his expression unreadable. "It's risky," he said finally. "If it fails, we lose whatever advantage we have left." I nodded. "But if it works, we might just save everything." After hours of debate, a plan began to take shape. We would reveal ourselves, not all at once, but gradually. We would appear to those who still held a connection to the natural world, to children playing in the woods, to hikers who respected the land, to the few humans who still remembered the old ways. We would show them the wonders of the forest, the magic that still lived in the wild places. And yes, we would show them our power, our ability to protect or destroy. But we would offer a choice, a chance for coexistence rather than conflict. It was a dangerous gamble. Many of the guardians were skeptical, afraid. But as the plan took shape, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to survive without losing ourselves in the process. As the council dispersed, William pulled me aside. "This plan of yours," he said, his voice low. "It could change everything." I nodded. "That's the idea." He studied me for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look right through me. "You still have some of that human in you," he said finally. "I thought it was a weakness, but maybe it's exactly what we need right now." With that, he melted into the shadows, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I stood there, feeling the pulse of the forest around me, I couldn't help but wonder, was there really still some part of Felix Montero left in me? And if so, could that small spark of humanity be the key to saving both our worlds? Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. The war wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, we had found a way to win it without losing our souls in the process. As dawn broke over the ancient forest, I made a silent vow, to the woods that had become my home, to the guardians who had become my family, and to the human world I had left behind. I would find a way to bridge the gap, to create understanding where there was fear, wonder where there was ignorance. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever is. And so, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, I stepped out of the shadows and into a new day. A day of revelation, of hope, and of the possibility of a future where the wild and the civilized could coexist once more. The awakening had begun. Our plan unfolded slowly, carefully. We began in small ways, revealing ourselves to those most open to the wonder of the natural world. A child wandering too far into the woods would find themselves guided home by a mysterious, kind presence. A lost hiker would stumble upon a clearing filled with impossible beauty, flowers blooming out of season, and animals behaving with unusual gentleness. We were subtle at first, leaving room for doubt and wonder. Was it real or just a trick of the light? A dream perhaps, or an overactive imagination? But gradually we became bolder. I remember the first time I fully revealed myself to a human. It was a young woman, an environmental activist who had chained herself to a tree to prevent its destruction. As the chainsaws revved in the distance, I emerged from the shadows. Her eyes widened in shock and fear as she saw me. No longer fully human, my form flickering between man and something other, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. But I held up my hands in a gesture of peace. "You fight for the forest," I said, my voice carrying the whisper of wind through leaves. "We have been fighting for it far longer." Her fear turned to awe as I showed her the true nature of the forest, the hidden connections between trees, the secret languages of birds and insects, the ancient spirits that dwelled in the oldest groves. When I left her, there were tears in her eyes and a fire in her heart. The next day, her story was all over the local news. Most dismissed it as the ramblings of an exhausted, overstressed activist. But some listened, some wondered, and so it went, across the country and then the world. We revealed ourselves to artists and scientists, to children and elders, to anyone who showed a genuine love and respect for the natural world. Each encounter was different, tailored to the individual, but the message was always the same. We are here. We have always been here, and we need your help. Not all of the guardians agreed with this approach. Some, like William, struggled with the idea of exposing ourselves so openly. "We're making ourselves vulnerable," he argued. "If they decide we're a threat, they could destroy us all." But as the months passed, something remarkable began to happen. The stories spread. More and more people began to speak out about encounters with forest spirits, with guardians of nature. Scientists who had scoffed at such notions found themselves faced with evidence they couldn't explain, and slowly attitudes began to shift. Conservation efforts that had been struggling for funding suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with support. Legislation to protect old-growth forests and endangered species sailed through previously hostile governments. Children dragged their parents on camping trips, eager to catch a glimpse of the forest spirits they'd heard about. It wasn't all positive, of course. There were those who feared us, who saw us as demons or monsters to be destroyed. There were corporations and governments who saw us as a threat to their power and profit. We faced new dangers, not just chainsaws and bulldozers, but scientists eager to study us, military forces tasked with containing us. But we were prepared. We had the power of the old forests behind us, the wisdom of centuries, the ability to vanish into shadow and reappear miles away. For every threat we had a counter. For every attack we had a defense. And always we had the growing support of those humans who understood what we represented. The last, best hope for a world where nature and civilization could coexist in harmony. As the years passed, I found myself becoming something of a bridge between our two worlds. My memories of my human life, faded though they were, gave me insight into the human perspective that many of the other guardians lacked. I could speak to scientists in terms they understood, explain our needs and nature in ways that made sense to human minds. It was a delicate balance, maintaining our mystery and power while also fostering understanding and cooperation. But with each passing year, each successful interaction, I felt more confident that we were on the right path. One day, about 5 years into our revelation, I stood with William at the edge of our forest, looking out at a city in the distance. Once, the sight of those buildings encroaching on our land would have filled us with rage and despair. Now I felt something different. Hope. "Do you think we did the right thing?" William asked, his voice carrying an uncertainty I'd never heard from him before. I looked at him, this ancient, powerful being who had been my mentor and friend for so long. "I do," I said. "It's not perfect, it's not easy, but it's better than war." He nodded slowly. "You were right," he said. "That spark of humanity in you, it saved us all, I think." I felt a warmth in my chest at his words. For so long I had thought of my human past as something to be discarded, a weakness to be overcome. But now I understood. It was that very humanity, that ability to bridge two worlds, that had given us a future. As we stood there, a cool breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the sense of both forest and city. In that moment I felt a profound sense of rightness, of balance restored. The war was over. The revelation had succeeded. And though challenges remained, though the work of maintaining this new balance would never truly be done, I knew that we had found a way forward, a way to be both guardians and guides, both protectors and teachers, a way to help humanity remember its connection to the natural world, and in doing so, save both our realms. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I smiled. Felix Montero, the software engineer from Little Rock, was long gone. But something of him lived on in me, the guardian of the forest, the bridge between worlds. And for the first time in a very long time, I was at peace. As decades passed, our revelation continued to reshape the world. The initial wonder and fear gave way to a new normal. One where the existence of forest guardians was accepted, if not fully understood. Humanity's relationship with nature underwent a profound transformation. Cities began to change, integrating more green spaces and sustainable practices. The boundaries between urban and wild areas blurred, with corridors of forest extending into city centers and buildings designed to coexist with natural ecosystems. It wasn't always a smooth transition, but it was a necessary one. I found myself taking on a new role as an ambassador between our worlds. I spoke at conferences, advised governments, and even gave interviews to carefully selected journalists. It was surreal, to say the least, a being of the deep woods discussing environmental policy in air-conditioned boardrooms. But it was vital work. William, ever adaptable, found his own niche in this new world. He became a teacher of the old ways, instructing a select few humans in the deepest mysteries of the forest. It was a controversial decision among some of the guardians, but William argued that sharing our knowledge was the best way to ensure its survival. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were still those who sought to exploit the natural world, who saw our powers as something to be harnessed or controlled. We faced new challenges, attempts to study our DNA, to replicate our abilities, to harness the old magics for human purposes. But we were prepared, and we stood firm. As the years turned to decades and decades to a century, I began to notice changes in myself. The last vestiges of my humanity were fading, replaced by something older, deeper, more connected to the eternal rhythms of the forest. I knew that soon, like William and the other ancient guardians, I would become something beyond human understanding. But before that happened, I had one last task to complete. It was a crisp autumn day when I returned to Little Rock, Arkansas. The city had changed dramatically since I'd last seen it, green technology and living architecture seamlessly blending with the old structures. As I walked the streets, now in the guise of an ordinary man, memories flickered through my mind, faded snapshots of a life long past. I made my way to a small park, one that hadn't existed when I was Felix Montero. In the center stood a statue, a stylized figure, half man and half tree, with a plaque at its base. I smiled as I read the inscription, "In memory of Felix Montero, who ventured into the forest and became legend. May his story remind us of the wonder and mystery that still exists in our world." I placed my hand on the cool bronze, feeling a connection to my past self that I hadn't experienced in years. It was strange to think that this was how humanity remembered me, not as the software engineer I had been, but as the catalyst for a global change. As I stood there, lost in thought, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see a young woman watching me curiously. There was something in her eyes, a spark of recognition perhaps, or just an openness to the wonders of the world. "Are you interested in the old stories?" she asked, gesturing to the statue. I smiled. "You could say that. What do you know about Felix Montero?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, it's such a fascinating tale. They say he was an ordinary man who discovered the truth about the forest guardians. His disappearance and the stories that followed were what led to the great revelation." She paused, looking at me more closely. "You remind me a bit of how they describe him, you know." I chuckled softly. If only she knew. "The stories don't tell it all," I said, "but they tell enough. Tell me, what do you think about the guardians, about the changes in the world?" She considered for a moment. I think it's amazing. Scary sometimes, sure, but amazing. We were killing our planet, you know, losing touch with what really matters. The guardians reminded us that we're part of nature, not separate from it." She smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, I get a bit passionate about this stuff." "Never apologize for passion," I said, "especially not for this." We talked for a while longer, about the state of the world, about the challenges and triumphs of the past century. As the sun began to set, I felt a familiar pull the forest calling me home. "I should go," I said. "It was a pleasure talking with you." "Olivia," she supplied, "and thank you. This was, well, I feel like I've learned something important, even if I'm not sure what." I smiled, allowing just a hint of my true nature to show through. Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of awe and understanding dawning in them. "Remember, Olivia," I said, my voice carrying the whisper of rustling leaves, "the forest is always there, always watching. Treat it with respect, with love, and it will reveal wonders to you." With that, I turned and walked away, feeling her wondering gaze on my back. As I reached the edge of the park, I allowed my human guise to fade, melting into the shadows of the trees that lined the street. My time as Felix Montero, as the bridge between worlds, was coming to an end. But my legacy would live on, in the changed world around me, in the stories told by firelight, in the hearts of those who still looked at the forests with wonder and respect. As I merged with the shadows, returning to the deep woods that had been my home for so long, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun on that fateful camping trip so many years ago had come full circle. The balance had been restored. The old ways and the new had found harmony. And though challenges would always arise, though the work of maintaining this balance would never truly be done, I knew that the world was better for the path we had chosen. As I took my place among the ancient trees, feeling the pulse of the forest around me, I smiled. Felix Montero was gone, but his story lived on. And in the whisper of the wind through the leaves, in the song of birds and the rustle of small creatures, in the very heartbeat of the wild places, his legacy would endure. For as long as there are forests, as long as there are those who remember the old stories and respect the wild places, we will be here, watching, protecting, guiding. This is the end of my story, but it is not the end of the tale. For the forest is eternal, and its guardians remain ever vigilant, ever present. Listen closely when you walk in the woods. Watch carefully when you stand at the edge of the wild places. For we are here and we are watching, and who knows? Perhaps one day, like Felix Montero so long ago, you too might hear the call of the deep woods and find yourself on an adventure beyond your wildest dreams. The monotonous hum of tires on asphalt had become a lullaby to Jake Harmon over his 15 years as a long-haul trucker. But tonight, that familiar sound was more of a siren call, luring him toward the dangerous shoals of exhaustion. He'd been on the road for nearly 9 hours, pushing the legal limit of his driving time. The clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m., its red digits a stark contrast to the inky blackness beyond his windshield. Jake's eyes felt like they were lined with sandpaper every time he blinked. He'd downed his third cup of gas station coffee 2 hours ago, but the caffeine buzz had long since faded, leaving him jittery and on edge. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, a futile attempt to physically fight off the fatigue creeping into his bones. The cab of his Peterbilt 579 was a cocoon of soft amber light from the instrument panel, but beyond the reach of his headlights, the world had been swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. Jake found himself leaning forward, straining to see anything beyond the cone of light illuminating the road ahead. The night seemed to press in on all sides, as if trying to crush the life out of his 10-ton machine. He'd driven this stretch of I-40 through eastern New Mexico countless times, but tonight it felt different. Alien, hostile even. The usual landmarks were cloaked in shadow, and even the familiar silhouettes of mesas and buttes rising against the starry sky seemed warped and menacing. Jake shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. He knew he was in no condition to keep driving. Few things were as dangerous on the road as a tired trucker behind the wheel, and he'd seen the aftermath of too many accidents caused by dozed-off drivers to risk it. Just as he was considering pulling onto the shoulder to catch a few hours of shut-eye, a pinprick of light appeared on the horizon. Jake sat up straighter, hope surging through him. As his truck rumbled down the empty highway, the light grew steadily closer and brighter. Soon it resolved into the welcoming glow of a service station. "Thank God," Jake muttered, flicking on his turn signal even though there wasn't another vehicle in sight. He eased off the accelerator, feeling the weight of the fully loaded trailer behind him as the big rig slowed. The exit ramp curved gently, leading him toward the oasis of light. As Jake pulled into the service station, he was surprised by the amount of activity. It was nearly midnight, but the forecourt bustled with other truckers. Most were burly men in high-visibility jackets, sipping from paper cups and munching on greasy food from the station's deli. A wave of relief washed over Jake. There was safety in numbers, and the thought of spending the night here among his own kind was infinitely preferable to dozing fitfully in his cab on the side of a desolate highway. He carefully maneuvered his rig into one of the oversized parking spots designated for semis, cut the engine, and climbed down from the cab. The cool night air hit him like a slap to the face, instantly refreshing. Jake stretched, hearing his spine pop in several places. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp desert air, tinged with the scent of diesel and fried food. As Jake walked toward the brightly lit building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, casting stark shadows that danced and shifted in ways that made him uneasy. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes drawn to the line where the station's lights ended and the vast darkness of the desert began. For a moment he could have sworn he saw movement in those shadows, something large and fast darting just out of sight. Jake blinked hard and looked again. Nothing but stillness and the soft whisper of wind through scrub brush. He shook his head, chalking it up to fatigue and an overactive imagination. Still, as he reached for the door handle, Jake couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was being watched. The harsh fluorescent lighting inside the service station made Jake squint as he entered. The smell of stale coffee and day-old hot dogs assaulted his nostrils, a greasy miasma that clung to everything. Despite the late hour, a surprising number of people milled about, mostly fellow truckers killing time or grabbing a quick bite before hitting the road again. Jake's stomach growled, reminding him that his last meal had been a hastily unwrapped protein bar somewhere in Texas. He made his way to the food counter, joining the short line of bleary-eyed drivers waiting to place their orders. As he waited, Jake found himself studying the other occupants of the service station. There was something almost surreal about the scene, a pocket of bustling humanity in the midst of the vast empty desert night. A heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard was hunched over a table, shoveling forkfuls of scrambled eggs into his mouth while poring over a dog-eared road atlas. Near the windows, two younger drivers were engaged in an animated conversation, their voices a low murmur beneath the hum of the overhead lights and the soft country music playing from tinny speakers. But it was the woman behind the counter who caught Jake's attention. She was older, probably in her mid-60s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite the late hour and what must have been a long shift, she greeted each customer with a warm smile and easy conversation. When it was Jake's turn to order, he approached the counter with a tired smile. "Evening, ma'am. First time at this service station. What's good here?" The woman, her name tag read Betty, smiled back. "Welcome, honey. Can't go wrong with our loaded fries. Throw some chili and cheese on there. It'll stick to your ribs." Jake nodded gratefully. "Sounds perfect. I'll take that and a large coffee, black." As Betty busied herself preparing his order, Jake made small talk. "Quite the crowd for this time of night." Betty glanced up, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, we get all sorts passing through here. Truckers, tourists, folks running from something or chasing after it. This place is a bit of a crossroads, if you know what I mean." There was something in her tone that made Jake pause. "Crossroads? How do you mean?" Betty's hand stilled for a moment, and when she looked up at Jake, the warmth had faded from her eyes. "Just that, well, strange things tend to happen around here, especially at night. You staying over?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, parked around back. Hit my drive time limit and figured this was as good a place as any to catch some shut-eye." The smile dropped from Betty's face entirely. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Listen to me carefully, young man. If you're staying the night, make sure you park under the hard lights. And whatever you do, don't wander out into the dark. Not here." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "What do you mean? What's out there?" Betty glanced around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. "I've worked here for 30 years, seen things you wouldn't believe, things that ain't natural. Just trust me on this. Stay in the light." Before Jake could press her further, Betty straightened up, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Here you go, hun. Enjoy your meal." She pushed a tray toward him, laden with a steaming plate of fries smothered in chili and cheese, along with a large paper cup of coffee. Jake took the tray, his appetite suddenly diminished. He found an empty booth in the corner and sat down, his mind reeling. Part of him wanted to dismiss Betty's warning as the ramblings of a superstitious old woman who'd spent too many nights alone in this desolate place. But there was a conviction in her eyes, a genuine fear that he couldn't shake. As he picked at his food, Jake found his gaze drawn to the windows. The light from the service station seemed to create a bubble of safety, beyond which lay an ocean of impenetrable darkness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching and waiting. A movement caught his eye, a fleeting shadow that seemed to dart just at the edge of the light. Jake blinked, and it was gone. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself it was just fatigue playing tricks on him. But as he stared out into the night, he couldn't help but wonder, what secrets did this lonely stretch of highway hold? And more importantly, would he live to see the morning and tell about them? Jake's fries had long since gone cold, congealing into an unappetizing mass on his plate. He'd managed to choke down about half before giving up, his appetite soured by an inexplicable sense of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. The coffee, at least, was doing its job. He felt more alert now, though not necessarily in a good way. Every shadow, every unexplained noise had him on edge. He glanced at his watch. 1:17 a.m. The initial flurry of activity in the service station had died down, with most of the other truckers having either hit the road again or retreated to their cabs for the night. Only a handful of people remained inside, a couple of bleary-eyed travelers nursing cups of coffee, and Betty behind the counter, methodically wiping down surfaces with a damp cloth. Jake stood, his joints popping in protest. He gathered his trash and made his way to the garbage can, then approached the counter. Betty looked up as he neared, a wary expression crossing her face. "Everything all right with your meal, hun?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was asking about more than just the food. Jake nodded. "Yeah, it was fine, thanks." He hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Listen, about what you said earlier, about strange things happening around here. What did you mean exactly?" Betty's eyes darted around the nearly empty service station before settling back on Jake. She sighed heavily, seeming to deflate a little. "I probably shouldn't say anything. Management doesn't like us talking about it. Bad for business, you know, but—" She trailed off, chewing her lower lip. "But," Jake prompted gently. Betty's voice dropped to a whisper. "But I've seen things, heard things that don't make no sense." She shuddered. "About 5 years back, a trucker, nice fella, used to stop in regular. He parked out back one night, in the dark part of the lot. Next morning his rig was still there, but he wasn't. We found pieces of him, like something had—" She swallowed hard. "Like something had torn him apart." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "Jesus, what? I mean, was it some kind of animal attack?" Betty shook her head emphatically. "No animal I've ever seen could do what was done to that poor man, and that ain't the half of it. Folks report seeing things out there in the dark, eyes watching them, voices calling their names. Some say they've seen something big and fast and—" She trailed off, her eyes glazing over as if lost in a terrifying memory. Jake waited, but Betty seemed disinclined to continue. He cleared his throat. "Have you ever seen anything yourself?" The question seemed to snap Betty out of her reverie. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Jake once more. "Once," she said softly. "Just once. It was late, like now. I was taking out the trash to the dumpster out back. I heard a sound, like something big moving through the brush. When I turned to look," she shuddered, "2 eyes glowing red in the dark, and a shape. God, it was huge. Didn't look like any animal I've ever seen. It was there for just a second, then it was gone." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to dismiss Betty's story as the product of an overactive imagination, but the genuine fear in her eyes was impossible to ignore. "Why," he started, then had to clear his throat. "Why haven't you reported this? To the police or—" Betty let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, honey, you think we haven't tried? Cops came out a few times, but they never found nothing. Said it was probably just coyotes or mountain lions. After a while, they stopped coming. And corporate," she shook her head, "they don't want to hear about it. Say it's bad for business. They've even tried to transfer me a couple times, but—" She gestured around the empty service station. "This place is my home. I can't just leave it." Jake nodded slowly, processing everything he'd heard. Part of him still wanted to rationalize it all away, stress, isolation, and the unforgiving desert playing tricks on people's minds. But another part, a primal part buried deep in his lizard brain, was screaming at him to get back in his truck and drive as far and as fast as he could. I should probably get some sleep," Jake said, his voice sounding strangely distant to his own ears. Betty nodded. "You do that, hun. Just remember what I said. Stay in the light." As Jake turned to leave, Betty called out to him one last time. "And whatever you do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if you hear anything at all, don't answer. Don't even look. Just stay in your cab and wait for dawn." Jake nodded numbly and made his way to the exit. As he pushed open the door, the cool night air hit him like a physical force. He paused on the threshold, looking out into the darkness. The lights of the service station created a small island of illumination, beyond which lay a sea of impenetrable blackness. For a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw movement out there, a large shape slinking just beyond the reach of the light. He blinked, and it was gone. Probably just his imagination, fueled by Betty's stories and too much caffeine. Still, as he made his way back to his truck, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He climbed into the cab, locking the doors behind him. As he settled into the sleeper berth, Jake found himself grateful for the larger-than-average size of his cabin. It felt like a fortress, a safe haven against whatever might be lurking out there in the dark. But as he lay there staring up at the ceiling, Jake couldn't help but wonder, was he truly safe? Or had he unwittingly stumbled into a nightmare from which there might be no waking? Sleep did not come easily to Jake. He tossed and turned in his berth, Betty's warnings echoing in his mind. Every creak of the truck's frame, every whisper of wind outside, had him starting awake, his heart pounding. When he did manage to drift off, his dreams were filled with shapeless horrors lurking just out of sight, red eyes gleaming in the dark. He wasn't sure how long he'd been asleep when a loud bang jolted him awake. Jake sat bolt upright, his forehead nearly colliding with the low ceiling of the sleeper berth. He froze, straining his ears. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing and the pounding of his heart. Then it came again, a distinct bang, as if something had struck the side of his truck. Jake's mouth went dry, his palms suddenly slick with sweat. He reached for the curtain separating the sleeper berth from the cab, his hand trembling. Before he could pull it aside, a scrabbling sound came from the passenger side of the truck. It was like nothing Jake had ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human. The sound of claws or nails dragging along metal, accompanied by a low, guttural growling that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He wanted desperately to look, to confront whatever was out there. But Betty's final warning rang in his ears. If you hear anything, anything at all, don't answer. Don't even look. The scrabbling intensified, moving along the side of the truck toward the back. Then, silence. Jake held his breath, straining to hear any sound of movement. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hammering of his own heart. Just as Jake began to think that perhaps it had all been a product of his overwrought imagination, a new sound broke the silence. A voice, low and gravelly, seemed to come from just outside his driver's side window. "Jake," it rasped, barely above a whisper. "Jake, come out and play." A chill ran down Jake's spine. How did it know his name? He hadn't told anyone at the service station his full name, had he? The voice came again, louder this time. "Jake, don't make me come in there and get you." Every instinct screamed at Jake to stay put, to keep quiet and wait for dawn. But curiosity and fear warred within him. He had to know what was out there. With trembling hands, Jake reached for the curtain again. He hesitated for a moment, then steeled himself and yanked it aside. At first he saw nothing but darkness beyond the window. Then, slowly, a shape began to coalesce in the gloom. 2 pinpricks of red light appeared, growing larger as if drawing nearer. Jake realized with horror that he was looking at a pair of eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light. As the shape drew closer, Jake could make out more details. It was vaguely humanoid, but much larger than any man he'd ever seen. Its body was covered in matted, thick fur, and its face... Jake's mind recoiled from what he saw. It was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, with a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth bared in a feral grin. The creature pressed its face against the window, its hot breath fogging the glass. Jake sat frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The monster's eyes bored into him, filled with a predatory intelligence that chilled him to his very core. Then, without warning, it reared back and slammed its massive fist against the window. The glass spiderwebbed, but held. Jake snapped out of his paralysis, scrambling backward into the sleeper berth. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. As Jake pressed the phone to his ear, praying for someone to answer, the creature outside let out a bone-chilling howl. It was a sound of pure hunger and rage, promising violence and death. Jake knew, with a certainty that transcended mere fear, that if that thing got into his truck, he wouldn't live to see the morning. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each unanswered ring sent a fresh wave of panic through Jake. Outside, the creature continued its assault on the truck, the impacts growing stronger with each blow. The spiderweb of cracks in the driver's side window was spreading, and Jake knew it was only a matter of time before the glass gave way. Finally, on the 5th ring, a voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Jake's words came out in a panicked rush. Please, you have to help me. I'm at the service station off I-40, mile marker 181. There's something out here, something trying to get into my truck. It's not human, it's... A particularly violent impact cut him off. The driver's side window finally shattered, sending a shower of glass into the cab. Jake scrambled further back into the sleeper berth, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Sir, are you still there?" The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "What's your name? Can you describe what's happening?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Through the shattered window, a massive, fur-covered arm was reaching into the cab, razor-sharp claws raking the air mere inches from where Jake huddled. The creature let out another bone-chilling howl, and Jake felt something warm running down his leg. With a start, he realized he had wet himself in terror. "Please," he whimpered into the phone. "Please hurry, it's going to kill me." The arm withdrew, and for a moment Jake dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, the thing had given up. But then he heard movement on the roof of the cab. The entire truck shook as something massive crawled across it. "Sir, I've dispatched units to your location," the 911 operator was saying. "They should be there in about 15 minutes. Can you get to a more secure location?" Jake wanted to laugh hysterically. 15 minutes? He'd be dead in 5. "There is no secure location," he whispered. "It's everywhere. It's..." His words were cut off as the roof of the cab suddenly caved in with a thunderous crash. Jake looked up to see the creature's face peering down at him through the new opening, its red eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. "Found you," it growled, its voice a horrifying mix of human speech and animalistic snarls. Jake screamed, dropping the phone. He pressed himself against the back wall of the sleeper berth, knowing there was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. The creature's massive arm shot through the opening, claws extended. Jake felt a searing pain as those claws raked across his chest, tearing through his shirt and into his flesh. Warm blood began to soak the front of his shirt. In that moment, as he stared death in the face, Jake's mind flashed back to Betty's warning. "Stay in the light," she had said. The light. With a surge of desperate energy, Jake lunged forward, pushing past the pain. He scrambled into the cab, his hand frantically searching for the switch to the external floodlights he'd had installed for nighttime deliveries. The creature, sensing its prey was about to escape, let out a roar of fury. It began to force its way through the opening in the roof, its massive body barely fitting through the gap. Jake's fingers finally found the switch. With a silent prayer, he flipped it on. Brilliant white light flooded the area around the truck. The effect on the creature was immediate and shocking. It recoiled as if struck, letting out a shriek of pain that was almost human in its anguish. Jake watched in disbelief as the thing retreated, scrambling off the roof of his truck and disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the floodlights. For several long moments Jake sat there, his chest heaving, blood still seeping from the gashes left by the creature's claws. He strained his ears, listening for any sign that it might return. But there was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the service station's generators. Slowly, painfully, Jake retrieved his fallen phone. The 911 operator was still on the line, her voice frantic. Sir, are you there? What's happening?" Jake took a shuddering breath. It's gone, for now, but please tell them to hurry. I don't know if the lights will keep it away for long." As if in response to his words, a long, mournful howl rose from somewhere in the darkness beyond the service station. It was filled with frustration and hunger and promise. A promise that this night was far from over. Jake huddled in his ruined cab, the floodlights his only protection against the horrors that lurked in the dark. And he prayed, for the first time in years, that he would live to see the dawn. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake remained huddled in his cab, one hand pressed against the bleeding gashes on his chest, the other clutching his phone like a lifeline. The 911 operator had stayed on the line with him, her calm voice a tenuous thread connecting him to sanity and safety. But as the adrenaline began to ebb, the pain from his injuries intensified. Each breath sent a fresh wave of agony through his body. Jake knew he needed medical attention, but the thought of leaving the relative safety of his truck and its protective circle of light filled him with paralyzing dread. A movement caught his eye and Jake's heart leapt into his throat. But it was only a fellow trucker, emerging from his own rig parked a few spaces away. The man looked around blearily, clearly having just woken up. His eyes widened as he took in the state of Jake's truck, the shattered window, the caved-in roof. "Hey," the man called out, starting to approach. "You okay in there? What the hell happened?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, to warn the man to get back to his own truck, to stay in the light. But before he could utter a word, a dark shape materialized out of the shadows behind the unsuspecting trucker. "No!" Jake screamed. "Behind you!" The trucker began to turn, but it was too late. A massive clawed hand closed around his throat, lifting him off his feet. The man's scream was cut off into a gurgling choke as the creature dragged him back into the darkness. Jake watched in horror, helpless to intervene. The sounds that followed, the wet tearing of flesh, the cracking of bones, the trucker's agonized moans fading into silence, would haunt him for the rest of his days. "What's happening?" The 911 operator's voice came through the phone, sharp with concern. "Sir, I heard screaming. Are you all right?" Jake couldn't find the words to describe the horror he'd just witnessed. It got someone else," he managed to choke out. "Oh God, it killed him. Where are the police? Please, you have to send someone." "Units are en route," the operator assured him. "They should be there any minute now. Just stay calm and—" Her words were drowned out by a cacophony of howls that rose from the darkness surrounding the service station. It wasn't just one voice, but many. A chorus of inhuman cries that sent shivers down Jake's spine. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the howling stopped. In the eerie silence that followed, Jake became aware of a new sound. Voices, human voices, calling out from the darkness. "Help us!" they cried. "Please, someone help us!" Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized one of the voices. It was Betty, the kindly woman from the service station counter. "Jake," her voice called out, filled with terror and pain. "Jake, honey, please help me. It's got me. Oh God, it hurts." Every instinct in Jake's body screamed at him to go to her aid, but a small, rational part of his mind held him back. He'd seen Betty less than an hour ago, safe behind the counter in the service station. There was no way she could be out there in the dark. "It's not real," he whispered to himself, squeezing his eyes shut. "It's not real. It's just trying to lure you out." But the cries continued, growing more desperate and agonized. Jake clamped his hands over his ears, trying to block out the sound. Tears streamed down his face as he fought against the urge to rush out into the darkness. "They're coming for you, Jake," a new voice whispered, seeming to come from right outside his shattered window. It was low and guttural, a twisted parody of human speech. "Your lights can't protect you forever. When they fail, we'll be waiting. And then the real fun begins." A chorus of inhuman laughter rose from the darkness, a sound of such malevolent glee that it shook Jake to his very core. He curled into a tight ball on the floor of his cab, squeezing his eyes shut and praying for this nightmare to end. In the distance, barely audible over the mocking laughter and agonized screams, Jake thought he heard the wail of approaching sirens. But would help arrive in time? Or would the encroaching darkness claim him before dawn could break? As the night wore on, Jake Harmon clung to his sanity by the thinnest of threads, trapped in a hell he never could have imagined when he'd pulled into this lonely service station just a few hours ago. The sirens grew louder, their urgent wails cutting through the cacophony of inhuman voices that had tormented Jake for what felt like an eternity. He uncurled himself from the fetal position he'd been in, wincing at the pain that lanced through his body. The gashes on his chest had mostly stopped bleeding, but they throbbed with every heartbeat. Through the shattered window of his cab, Jake could see the first hints of pre-dawn light tinging the eastern sky. The long night was finally coming to an end, but would help arrive in time. The sound of squealing tires and slamming car doors jolted Jake fully alert. Flashlight beams cut through the dim light, sweeping across the parking lot. "Police, is anyone there?" a voice called out. Jake's heart leapt. He fumbled for the door handle, his fingers clumsy with exhaustion and lingering terror. As he pushed the door open, a wave of dizziness washed over him. He realized he'd lost more blood than he'd thought. "Here," he croaked, his voice hoarse from hours of screaming and crying. "I'm here. Please help." Two police officers approached cautiously, their flashlights trained on Jake. He saw their eyes widen as they took in the state of his truck and his blood-soaked shirt. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. "What the hell happened here?" Jake opened his mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could he possibly describe the horrors he'd witnessed? Who would believe him? "Sir, are you Jake Harmon?" the other officer asked. When Jake nodded weakly, she continued, "We got a 911 call about a disturbance here. Can you tell us what happened?" Before Jake could respond, a commotion from the direction of the service station drew their attention. More flashlight beams appeared, accompanied by urgent voices. "We've got a body over here," someone shouted. "Looks like it's been... oh God." The officer speaking to Jake keyed her radio. "Dispatch, we're going to need additional units and a crime scene team out here. And get an ambulance rolling. We've got at least one injured civilian." As if summoned by her words, the wail of an approaching ambulance joined the chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices. The sky was growing steadily lighter, the encroaching dawn seeming to push back the shadows that had held such terror during the night. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was safe. It was over. But even as that thought crossed his mind, he became aware of a low, rumbling growl coming from somewhere behind his truck. He turned, his heart in his throat, to see a pair of glowing red eyes watching him from the edge of the light. The creature was still there, held at bay by the growing daylight, but unwilling to fully retreat. "There," Jake shouted, pointing. "It's right there. Can't you see it?" The officers spun, their hands going to their weapons, but by the time they looked where Jake was pointing, the eyes had vanished. All that remained was an empty stretch of scrubland, already being illuminated by the first true rays of sunlight. "Sir, there's nothing there," one of the officers said gently. "Let's get you looked at by the paramedics. You've lost a lot of blood." As they led him toward the waiting ambulance, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced back over his shoulder, scanning the brightening landscape for any sign of the creature that had terrorized him through the night. For a moment he thought he saw something, a large dark shape slinking away into a culvert at the edge of the property. But then he blinked, and it was gone. Had it all been real? Or had fear, isolation, and blood loss caused him to hallucinate the entire ordeal? As the paramedics began to treat his wounds, Jake found he no longer knew what to believe. But one thing was certain, he would never look at the dark the same way again. And he knew with a bone-deep certainty that he would never again stop at the lonely service station at mile marker 181. 1 month later, Jake Harmon sat in his therapist's office, his fingers idly tracing the still healing scars on his chest. Dr. Eileen Chen watched him with a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. "How have the nightmares been this week, Jake?" she asked gently. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. It had started to go gray at the temples in the weeks since that terrible night. "Better, I think. I still have them every night, but I don't wake up screaming anymore." "That's progress, right?" Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "It is. Trauma takes time to process, Jake. What you experienced, well, it's not something anyone could just shake off." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "What I experienced? You mean what I think I experienced, right? That's what everyone keeps telling me, that it was all in my head, mass hysteria or hallucinations from blood loss or whatever." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "What do you believe happened that night, Jake?" Jake was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the bustling city beyond. How could he explain the inexplicable? The memory of those glowing red eyes, the inhuman howls, the terror that had gripped him so completely. It all felt so real, even now. "I know what I saw," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what I heard. It wasn't human, Doc. Whatever was out there that night, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist in our world." Dr. Chen nodded, her face neutral. "And how does holding on to that belief affect you, Jake? Does it help you move forward, or does it keep you trapped in that night?" Jake considered the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "Sometimes I think I'm crazy, that maybe everyone's right and it was all just some vivid hallucination. But then I look at these scars." He gestured to his chest. "And I know it was real." "The police report mentioned another victim," Dr. Chen prompted gently. "A trucker who was found, deceased at the scene. Have you had any thoughts about that? Jake squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of the man being dragged into the darkness, the horrible sounds that had followed. I see his face every night in my dreams, he whispered. I keep thinking, if I had warned him sooner or if I had somehow helped him. Jake, Dr. Chen interrupted softly. You can't blame yourself for that man's death. From everything you've told me, there was nothing you could have done. Jake nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at him. He cleared his throat. I tried to go back, to the service station. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? When was this? Last week, Jake said. I don't know what I thought. That maybe seeing it in the daylight would help me process everything. That I'd find some evidence of what happened, something to prove I wasn't crazy. And did you find what you were looking for? Jake shook his head. I couldn't even find the place. I drove up and down that stretch of I-40 for hours. There was nothing there. No service station, no mile marker 181. It was just gone. Dr. Chen was silent for a moment, her pen poised over her notepad. How does that make you feel, Jake? Jake laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. How does it make me feel? It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind, Doc, like maybe everyone's right, and it was all just some elaborate delusion. But you don't really believe that, do you? Dr. Chen asked softly. Jake met her eyes. No, he said firmly. No, I don't. I know what happened to me was real. I don't know how to live with it. How do I go back to my normal life after experiencing something like that? Dr. Chen set her notepad aside and leaned forward. Jake, trauma changes us. Whether it's a car accident, a violent crime, or something less easily defined. The goal isn't to go back to who you were before. It's to find a way to move forward, to integrate this experience into your life in a way that doesn't cripple you. Jake nodded slowly. And how do I do that? We work on it together, Dr. Chen said with a small smile. It's a process, Jake. It takes time, but I believe you can get there. As Jake left the office that day, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since that terrible night. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, but he was determined to reclaim his life. But as he walked to his car, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He scanned the busy street, half expecting to see glowing red eyes peering at him from some shadowy alley. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual bustle of city life. Jake shook his head, trying to clear away the paranoia. As he climbed into his car, his hand brushed against something in his pocket. Frowning, he pulled it out. It was a matchbook, emblazoned with the logo of the service station at mile marker 181. Jake stared at it, his mouth going dry. He knew with absolute certainty that he hadn't had this before. Somehow, it had appeared in his pocket during his therapy session. With trembling hands, Jake opened the matchbook. Inside, scrawled in spidery handwriting, was a message. We're still waiting, Jake. The dark is patient. We'll meet again. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He looked up, scanning the street once more. For just a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure standing on the corner. An older woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Betty? But when he blinked, she was gone. Jake sat in his car, the matchbook clutched in his shaking hand, as the reality of his situation crashed over him. It wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. The creatures of the night that had tormented him at mile marker 181 weren't content to stay in that lonely stretch of desert. They had followed him here to the heart of the city, and they were patient. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, Jake Harmon realized a chilling truth. His long night of terror had only just begun.